Good morning. At 9 o'clock, the whole room got quiet. I don't understand. That never happened to me when I was teaching. This never happened. I now convene the February 7th, 8th, 2019 meeting of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Will the recording secretary please call the roll?
Kathleen Olivey, Kirsten Barnes, Kathleen Williams-Brown, C. Michael Cooney, Linda Darling-Hammond,
Here.
Marisol Escobedo, Jose Gonzalez, Makita Guino-Shire, Johanna Harwig, Alicia Hine, Terry Jackson, Bonnie Clapp, Kevin Quinn, Jan Marks, Monica Martinez, Castle Redmond, Ade Rodriguez, Gina Sloan, Andrew Wall. We have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Hartwig, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll start with some announcements. I would like to announce the appointments for the 2019 Executive Committee. The committee includes Ide Rodriguez, who will chair the Educator Preparation Committee, Michael Cooney, the Professional Practices Committee, Monica Martinez, Fiscal Policy and Planning Committee, Alicia Hind, the Legislative Committee, Marisol Escobedo, the Certification Committee, and Kevin Kung, the Appeals and Waivers Committee. And I would like to thank Commissioners Klatt, Barnes, and Gonzalez for their leadership and service in 2018 as committee chairs. Item 2A is the approval of the November 2018 minutes. We'll need to make two separate motions to approve the ad hoc committee and regular session minutes. I'd like to remind everyone that only those who serve on each committee can make and second the motion to approve the committee minutes. Do I have a motion from a member of the ad hoc committee to approve the November 2018 ad hoc committee minutes? And that includes Michael, Jane, and Ide. Thank you very much, Commissioner Cooney. And second from Ide Rodriguez. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next, do I have a motion to approve the November 2018 commission minutes? And this is, thank you, Commissioner Cooney. And do I have a second? Commissioner Barnes, thank you. Any discussion?
These were perfect.
I don't know who did the minutes, but let the record show that the minutes were perfect. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, let's take note of the abstentions, whoever's keeping track here. We have Commissioner Torres Escobedo, Martinez, and Gonzalez Jose. The next item is 2B, approval of the February 2019 agenda. We have agenda inserts for items 2C and 6A. Do I have a motion to approve the February 2019 agenda? Thank you. And second, Commissioner, so we have Commissioner Gonzalez and Commissioner Rodriguez. Motion carries. Agenda item 2C is approval of the February 2019 consent calendar. Do commissioners have any items they would like to consider in closed session? Commissioner Klatt?
I would like to consider number 104, Pellegrin, and number 106, Pinkston.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Commissioner Rodriguez?
I would like to consider number 54, Gillum.
Okay.
Benjamin Gillum.
Okay. Any others to Commissioner Cooney?
Number 27, Centennial.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve all remaining items on the consent calendar? Thank you. Thank you very much. And a second? Thank you very much. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So I'm just going to launch us this day by noting that we have another chapter in the California story, beginning to take place. We have a new governor since we last saw each other, new legislature. They are getting going. It's an interesting moment to kind of take stock of where we've been and where we're going. We are now sort of 8 years into a sort of a major shift in California policy with the LCFF, the investment that more clearly tracks pupil needs, more money coming into the system, although as many would say not quite yet enough to be adequate. California has kind of moved from, if you account for cost of living, 48th in spending to about 35th. So we're moving up. And along with that and the LCAPs and the local control accountability system and more engagement of communities and educators in making the decisions about how we spend our money, the multiple measures that are part of the state priorities and the new dashboard that are focusing schools on a broader agenda, the investments we've made in new licensing and accreditation, which goes along with the Common Core standards and with the emphasis on social emotional learning and restorative practices. We are seeing changes in schools all across the state. The achievement is going up. California and 8th graders 10 years ago were 45th to 48th in rankings on the national assessment. In the most recent one in 2017, 8th graders in reading were almost at the national average. So big increase in reading, and in math, 8th graders had cut in half the distance between where we were at the bottom and the national average. So we're seeing those improvements. We've seen improvements in graduation rates from about 74% in 2010 to about 83%. In 2018, so we're seeing that. We're seeing gaps closing. There's some evidence from some research that gains in graduation rates and math achievement and reading achievement are related to the investments from LCFF. And interestingly, there's some evidence that the work we've been doing is contributing to that. There was a survey of California principals which found that newly prepared principals feel much better prepared to teach and lead in a whole child environment with a knowledge base around the Common Core standards and the social emotional learning restorative practices and supports for kids than principals earlier prepared. That's probably related to the licensing and accreditation work that we have been doing to improve those programs for principals. So I think it's an interesting point. One of the big sets of studies that came out last fall was called Getting Down to Facts 2. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember Getting Down to Facts 1. Back in about 2007, there were about 20-some studies that were organized. Susanna Loeb, my colleague at Stanford, was kind of the cheerleader, organizer for all of that. But those studies actually led to a lot of what I just reported. A lot of the reforms that we've experienced came out of the efforts of people to say, how could we fund and manage schools better? This batch of studies are saying, well, where are we now and what do we have to do to move forward? And there are about 30 of them. If you're interested and you're really in, part of the nerd herd or the geek squad, you can go onto the website of the Policy Analysis for California Education PACE at Stanford, and you can see all those papers. But just to point out that a lot of the things I've mentioned are documented there, but we still have some obvious challenges, and I think those are getting on the agenda now, as you can see in the governor's first budget. One of the findings was that relative to socioeconomically similar districts across the country, our kids are progressing at a comparable rate in K through 12, although we have higher poverty rates in this state than in many other states. But if you control for that, but they come to school with a bigger gap and further behind than in other states. And that's the need for early learning, for really creating a strong early learning system. So on our agenda this time, we're going to have our first foray into identifying teacher performance expectations for early childhood educators and beginning to build a system that can license and accredit and support and invest in those educators. The governor had about $2 billion in his budget, investments in early learning of various kinds for professional development, for facilities, et cetera. So I think it's a next step in our California story. We're still, of course, trying to solve teacher shortages. So that will continue to be on our agenda. I think we're going to see when our data come in a little uptick in the credentialing. So we are seeing some progress, but we do have a long way to go. And we will be looking continually to be sure that we're able to provide the financial supports and other supports to bring people in and help them get well prepared and then retain them in the profession over the years to come. It's just, I think it's actually a very hopeful moment. I think there was a film that John Merrow did a few years ago called From First to Worst, because California had been one of the top achieving states in the nation in the 1970s and before Prop 13. And then we sank literally to the bottom in spending and achievement before this set of reforms came in. And we're on our way back up. So I think our motto for the next 8 years should be, from worst to first. And the commission is part of that. And our part is just making sure that we can really arm educators with the tools that they need to be the major part of the progress. So I'll pass the ball to Mary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the big view. And thanks for starting us off with that. And good morning, commissioners and members of our larger community. It's great to be with you. First meeting of 2019. I'd like to invite Charlie Waters to come to the table. Yeah, all the way up. I know, wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. I didn't tell him I was going to do that. So Charlie Waters for the last 4 years has been our Director of Certification, working the office right across the hall from you, producing all the credentials that we produce. And it's been a remarkable 4 years to have Charlie. He retired last week. Last Thursday was his last day with us. Yes, I know. I know. Whatever he's doing, it's working for him, don't you think? We have so appreciated the energy and spirit that he has brought to this work. He was a middle school principal when we recruited him. And, that seemed like just the right kind of person to put into a job like this, right? He didn't necessarily bring all of the technical knowledge about credentialing that you might think he needed. But I'll tell you, we have enough technical knowledge about credentialing across the hall to choke, the state of California. What we needed at the time was somebody who brought the ability to inspire a group that spends a lot of time producing and reviewing documents, and it's head down, focused work. And we needed somebody to enliven the space and help us to reculture and create a culture of joy across the hall. Joy and exactly. We set high standards. We're very ambitious here. And I'll never forget, and I told this at his retirement party, the day that I was looking for him, and I came downstairs, there was nobody across the hall. They were all over here, and I opened the doors and saw there were paper airplanes flying all over the room. And our general counsel at the time was, rather appalled that we might be flying paper airplanes in the building at any time. But, what's this about? But it was about the task that we assigned to Charlie, which was to reculture, to bring a culture of teamwork and esprit de corps, to increase the esprit de corps in that core group of people that are so fundamental to the work we've done. And at his retirement party, the testimonials around the room to that progress, to the progress we've made, were terribly moving. We did have paper airplanes on Thursday in here again, and some really fine jetliners that, went a long way, sailed a long way. But I just wanted to take this moment to publicly thank Charlie for being with us for these 4 years and for all of the contributions that you've made to our work here. So if you'll join me, I'd like to applaud with you. Anything you'd like to say?
Well, I wasn't expecting to make a speech, but I do want to say thank you to all of you. It's been an extraordinary experience being here, and to Mary for giving me the opportunity to work here. We have a fantastic team in certification, and I'm going to miss them tremendously, but I think that they're in good hands, and you'll find out who in just a minute is going to lead the troops from here on. I have retired, and I highly recommend it when your time comes. But you know, I will be involved in projects to some degree somehow in the future. Don't know what those are yet, but right now, just breathe. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful experience. I really appreciate it, and I hope our paths will cross again in the near future.
Thank you, Charlie. So I'd also like to then introduce our interim director of certification. We'll be launching a search this spring. And Erin, I'm not going to ask you to come to the table, but if you would stand so everyone can see you. This is Erin Skubal, and I'm going to just give you some brief information about her. Erin is a mother of two, and since graduating with her bachelor's degree in business administration, has devoted her career in state service to ensuring that California's public schools have fully prepared and credentialed teachers. Erin has been a dedicated member of the Commission's certification division since November of 2008. In her decade-long career with the Commission, she's worked diligently with stakeholders to craft policy that has a meaningful impact on students, including serving as one of the primary architects for the Teaching Permit for Statutory Leave, TPSL. Erin has also been instrumental in the advancement of the assignment monitoring program, leading the team that is currently developing the automated California statewide assignment accountability system. Exciting work on any given day, and we are so thrilled to have Erin stepping in as interim director across the hall, and that's who you'll see when we bring certification items in the future. So thank you, Erin. At our last meeting, we recognized the work of Catherine Carney, who has been an administrator and one of the primary drivers with Terry Clark and Cheryl Hickey and the team in developing and implementing our accreditation reforms. And her last day with us was last Friday, February the 1st, and we had a great celebration for her as well. I'd like to introduce to you the person who we've hired and promoted to take over the position that she was serving in, and that's Erin Sullivan. Would you please stand? So Erin, there we go. I'll tell you a little bit about Erin. She began, it seems that being an Erin in this agency is a good thing. We talk about the Erins all the time. So Erin began her career with the Commission in 2001 in the certification unit. Since then, she has served on worked closely with nearly every division of the Commission, including 7 years as the Commission's legislative representative, just prior to joining her colleagues in the Professional Services Division in 2014. As a consultant in PSD, Erin has been involved in the implementation of the Commission's strengthened and streamlined accreditation system, providing technical assistance to institutions, conducting site visits, coordinating and conducting program review and common standards review sessions, and training of the Board of Institutional Reviewers. In addition, Erin has been co-lead in the Commission's work to revise and strengthen the preparation of California's early childhood workforce, and has worked with subject matter preparation programs to bring them into alignment with the Common Core state standards and the Next Generation Science standards, and serves also as the consultant for adult education preparation. She writes, edits, and distributes the weekly PSDE news as well. So in her new role, Erin adds oversight of PSD's travel team, the staff that manages coordination of contracts and travel reimbursement claims for all of the people who work in our system. She will plan, schedule, and conduct all program review and common standards review sessions, and essentially will be taking over where Catherine left off with supporting and helping to lead and direct the implementation of our accreditation reforms. So Erin Sullivan has a new role with us, and we're pleased to introduce her to you. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Good morning. Just a couple quick things. It is National School Counseling Week, and so what a great time to be talking about the item coming up later today. We just Executive Director of CASC put out to the counselors that through DataQuest, the counselor ratio is now at a 1 to 620 ratio as opposed to 1 to 900 a few years ago. So that's moving in the right direction. So that's important. I know that there's still some improvement to be done, but maybe we'll get to the 1 to 250 ratio. Maybe not before I leave, but it's exciting to see. And then also some exciting news. So on our work group, Catalina Cifuentes was a member of that work group, but I'm sure everybody here has heard, but State Superintendent Tony Thurman appointed her as the new Deputy Superintendent of the Performance Planning and Technology Branch. That's a long title, but it's very exciting because the things that she's going to be involved in helping out with are very, very important to school counseling, college and career readiness, and so I'm just excited that the school counselor has a role at the state level by the superintendent.
I wanted to let everyone know that Aaron and Phyllis went to the California Community College ECE organization meeting last week. Yeah, last week. I got a lot of input from them. Your presentation was thorough, positive, and they're very supportive and very appreciative that you both came to really. They said they came to our meeting and they're the ones that are doing the work. I said, yep, they're the ones that were doing the work. You got it right from the right directly. I also wanted to mention that the Association of California Community Colleges spring conference, it's called the plenary, is coming up in April, and that there is a group putting together a resolution to support early childhood education in the state of California, and will call in part for the expansion and development of campus lab schools that will help in teacher preparation as well as support student parents. So just thought I'd give you that preview, coming attractions, and I'll let you know how that resolution gets perfected after our April plenary.
Gonzalez.
I too would like to commend staff. We see their incredible work and their talents every other month and behind the scenes. I was not able to attend the November meeting because I was with my school board at the California School Boards Association annual conference. And at that conference, I had the pleasure and pride to sit in the meeting with the certification team. I believe it was Charlie, Cheryl, Aaron, and Angel. You all did a magnificent job talking about the teacher shortage, solutions, and the opportunities that you all are working. And again, to echo Commissioner Brown's message, it's extremely powerful when we have the drivers of the work out there sharing and representing the commission. So thank you for the work that you do.
I actually want to give an update just in terms of the situation in Butte County. I want to thank Commissioner Ibe Rodriguez for reading, my report at the last meeting due to my absence. But, there's so many aspects just in terms of the campfire that we just could never have imagined. When I returned to my classroom in December, I looked at my students, and I know they didn't want to talk about the 1920s in the next unit, but my U.S. history juniors were on it just in terms of asking questions regarding resource management, climate change, social services, and truly what's happening in our county. School relocations happened within Paradise Unified School District. Within Butte County, schools literally open their doors to house other campuses on their campuses. That's been the short-term plan. The long-term conversations are happening now. And I want to focus just in terms of the generosity that has been flooding into the area as well. World Central Kitchen visited the area. Our students were so excited about that. The 49ers reached out and brought the Paradise High School football team to a game, and they actually got to go on the field and whatnot. But I also want to share a story. In the commission, I've shared before that some of my U.S. history juniors attend the Sojourn to the Past trip, where students are immersed in this civil rights experience. They travel to the Deep South and they meet individuals involved in the civil rights movement, such as Congressman John Lewis. And a week after the fire, we were supposed to host a fundraiser, and, my students started emailing me, is this going to happen? It's like, no, life is paused at the moment. I'm not sure what's happening. But the Welch Family Foundation heard about our story. They're in the Bay Area. And they are actually going to fund the entire trip for this group of students in honor of Michaela Gregory. Michaela Gregory actually attended the Sojourn to the Past trip as a high schooler, but she tragically died in the Ghost Ship fire in 2016. So in her honor, they're helping these Butte County students have this transformative civil rights experience in the Deep South in March. So, yeah. And thank you to everybody, and it's a long road ahead for us. So,
I just want to thank you and all of the staff and faculty in the county and in the towns that you live in. It's what teachers have been doing and other staff to really enable the communities to come back together has been unbelievable. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Other commissioners? All right, liaisons. Do we have liaisons? Yes. Commissioner Rodriguez.
Okay, let's see here. Can you hear me? So the Committee on Accreditation met last week. The agenda was packed with 6 accreditation reports, a progress report, and 2 follow-ups, in addition to other policy and issues regarding accreditation. The COA members engaged in robust conversations based on the items before them. Apparently, creating robust conversation is one of the goals of the staff, as was communicated to us by Catherine Carney, who retired, and that was her last day at with the commission. And because, in her words, they want to be respectful of the committee members' time. There are people who are very busy, and they want to make sure that the time that they spend here is well worth it. So most of the accreditation reports reflected the high quality teacher preparation with all conditions met. And one that I'd like to highlight is at Awanda. The superintendent, we were told, takes the new teachers on a tour of the area on a bus to show them where the students live, to remind them that a future superintendent may be in one of those houses. In other words, they're students. Additionally, the induction program is so powerful that the seasoned veteran teachers want to participate in it because they see how beneficial it is. However, on the other side, a program that didn't meet all the conditions was Summer Preparatory Charter School. Their intern program raised a few red flags and, again, some robust conversation with the committee members. Their interns are supposed to be employed and aren't, and there were also some issues with regards to subject matter competence. The participants who were interviewed said that they didn't feel especially prepared, and so Summit will address these terms, but in the meantime, they won't be able to recommend teachers for the credential according to the committee members. And the university partner will be responsible for this. And you will also be delighted to find out how the programs are using completer surveys. I won't steal Cheryl Higgie's thunder because she'll be talking about that today. So thank you.
Much. Any other liaison reports? Yes, Commissioner Kung.
So Commissioner Klatt and I met last week for the first of 4 CTE work group meeting. And I want to actually thank the commission staff, especially Bob and Jake, for organizing such a diverse group of experts. With CTE teachers, administrators, university representatives, organizations such as school boards, and representatives out of state. Is such a great group of people with such a diverse backgrounds. The group was then divided into 3 subgroups: credentialing, curriculum, and retention recruitment. In each of the different groups, we brainstormed ideas thinking outside of the box on how we can recruit, credential, and find CTE teachers to serve our students. There's a lot of great ideas, but it was just our first initial meeting, so I'm looking forward to our next meeting in a couple of weeks to further analyze what we've brainstormed and synthesize that information. So it's a first of, I believe, 4 meetings that I'm looking forward to.
Great. Yes, Commissioner Klatt.
And I will just briefly echo Commissioner Kung's report and say again that staff really facilitated a meeting where I think people felt really free to explore ideas. And so thank you to the staff and thank you to all the people who came and were so enthusiastic about working on this issue.
Terrific. Any other liaisons? Yes.
Hi. So after the last meeting, I wanted to really come back and share with you guys what student teachers out in the field were questioning or comments that they had, as well as first-year teachers. So I went around and I spoke to the varying cohorts at UCR, as well as some first-year teachers, that just started this year. And I was surprised to see that there was two very similar comments amongst all of them. And the first was that general education teachers, as well as single subject credentialed teachers, they really were hoping that they would get more of an opportunity to learn about how to deal with students with special needs, because they're not always placed in a special education class. And, as first year teachers, they were very apprehensive on how to go about educating their students who did have special needs. And as for the first year teachers, they also were hoping to get a little bit more, support out in the field. They felt that they were getting training and they were going to these conferences, but they didn't, from what they expressed to me, their mentors weren't in the same grade level as them. And so because of that, they often had a hard time giving them advice that would help them in their classrooms. So, I'm still a student myself, so I didn't really have answers for them, but I told them I would share it with you guys and see if I could bring back any answers for them. So, yeah.
All right. That's a lot. We'll see how many answers we can figure out at this meeting. Any other liaisons? Yes, Commissioner Kung.
Just want to add one more thing. I just want to say Happy Lunar New Year to everyone and everyone who celebrates.
Yes. We appreciate that. We should actually celebrate in some way.
Okay.
Item 2H is the Commission on Teacher Credentialing Priorities for 2019. This is the start of the new year. We get oriented for all the work we're going to do. Mary.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So typically we do this at the first meeting of every year. It's required in your policy manual. And typically I do this orally in the Executive Director's report. But we felt like it would be a good opportunity this year to put the specific project level priorities that we expect to undertake this year in the bigger context of the work of the agency. So we have included a chart for you within the agenda item that is organized around the strategic plan goals, the large multi-year goals that we established in 2014. And in column 1, we've identified the ongoing systems work that we're engaged in that represents the vast majority of the work we do in the agency. This is all the production work in our certification division, all the accreditation work in our professional services, all the discipline work up in Division of Professional Practices, et cetera. So that it's just important to know that whatever we take on new, it's fitting into a larger context of work where the workload is increasing and the staff is working ever so much harder to get that done. In the second column, what we have identified here are milestones for the ongoing projects we've identified for the last several years for you. And we've been engaged in reforming and restructuring many aspects of our systems and our credentials. Moving to a performance-based accreditation system is a multi-year, multi-task, multifaceted endeavor. So there are a number of milestones listed there in the 2019 milestones column that reflect what implementation of those earlier reforms and policies will look like in the coming years. And then the shorter list of things are the specific things that we expect to come up here in 2019 as new work that we'll initiate. But as with most of the things we do, it's not one and done. It's, the beginning of something, it's iterative and ongoing. And yes, continuous improvement is one of our watchwords here. So specifically in terms of the milestones we expect to hit this year on our ongoing project work is the continued work in updating the accreditation system. There's more yet to do here as we bring more of our outcomes systems online and inform the system. And you're going to get a great update from Cheryl a little later about how surveys as an outcome measure are informing that work. It's just one of many things that will do that. Of course, you've heard from our liaisons. We're doing the work in career technical education. Expect to bring a report with recommendations to you this year about credentialing in CTE. We've got the ongoing work. We've developed performance assessments, and now we are in the first year of implementation, which is a big, big time for us to see how the systems work. We'll set passing standards for the TPA and the APA this year, but then we'll move into full-on implementation next year. And there's a huge amount of training in the field of assessors and scoring and learning from that system. At the same time that, and you'll hear this in your budget update shortly, we've been invited to work on yet another area of performance assessment. So that'll be ongoing. The assignment monitoring work, we are rapidly trying to move this from a 1980s conception of how to do it to a 21st century conception of how to do it. And we've got a great team of folk in the building who are working on that. We've had some legislation to help us build systems to automate what we can and make the collection of information easier and more accessible. So that's big. We've been talking for some time about the need to look at our RECA assessment and look at how that is reflected in the overall development of our teaching workforce. So that's on the agenda. The pupil personnel services credential standards have been a work in progress, and great work has been done there. We expect to bring those to closure this year and adopt them. Commissioner Barnes, we're excited to do that with all of you. So, of course, we've been working on the special education credential for some time, and we expect to take some next steps this year with an authorization statement. We've been working closely with our stakeholders to get that, hit the right spot with that so that we don't overwhelm the community of teachers who are doing this work, but we do recognize that we've made some changes in the credential and that we've got the appropriate authorization moving forward. With the early childhood work, today's a big day for us to take a look at standards for that community. That's the beginning of the next phase of work, which is going to be intense but important, and so that's a big milestone. And then overall, we're continuing to work on operational effectiveness. With growing workload in certification and discipline, we have increasing pressures, and we've been working with the administration to look at how to get that resourced adequately. So that's a big piece. So that's the ongoing. In terms of new things we expect to initiate this year, you may recall there was a bill that was passed establishing and requiring us to establish a theater and dance credentials. So we'll be starting the work on SMRs for that. If you want to know what that is, you can ask me later. I'll tell you. We have been talking. We had a great discussion 2 meetings ago about subject matter testing, the CSAT, and some big ideas emerged in that discussion about, what are the different ways we ought to be looking at subject matter competence. So we've got an agenda item at this meeting to take some initial steps, harvesting the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to ease some of the burdens in that system. But we really want to take a deeper look at this, and that'll be part of the work we start this year. We have, as I mentioned, direction and hopefully funding in the governor's budget to develop a special ed form of the teaching performance assessment. That'll be exciting work to get started on later this year. We've been talking for some time about how we can recognize exemplary programs through our accreditation system. That's a piece of work we're piloting this year, and I think Cheryl may be able to tell you more about that a little later. And of course, we also need to work with the Attorney General's office and our stakeholders on the discipline system. We talked at our last meeting. The AG was here to talk with us about the overall system, and we have been talking about how we might get a bill organized that would help us restructure this in ways that are appropriate for the workforce and also effective for how we manage that system. So that's another area of work that we expect to be working on this year. So that's an overview of what we're planning this year. I offer it for your information, discussion, consideration if you have any questions. Actually, I'm going to anticipate something. I forgot to mention something here, and it has to do with a bilingual work group, and Terry's nodding to me. This is also work and you've got an item on your agenda that is focusing on bilingual credentialing, and this is an area of growth in this state, and we've been asked and are actually planning to launch work this year with a bilingual advisory group to help us look at the requirements and specifications for credentialing in that area as well, to get that brought along and up to date as well. So forgive me for those of you in the audience who are wondering where that was on the agenda. It's on the agenda. So thank you.
And we do have some public comment because I think there are people who think we might not have enough to do. So No, probably about these items. And then we'll open this for discussion if the commissioners have some thoughts. So Ivania Soto, you're first on the list. And please state your name and affiliation for the record. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Okay, my name is Ivania Soto. I'm a professor on loan from Whittier College, working with the California Association for Bilingual Education on a bilingual teacher and administrator pipeline program. And so we thank you for adding the bilingual work group. We just wanted to remind the commission that this group has formed with representatives from CSUs, UCs, and private institutions, that we will begin with a refresh of the bilingual authorization standards. And then also we wanted to reiterate the need for a bilingual expert panel, right, that can provide guidance in between each of the meetings, and that having an early childhood perspective, right, kind of to one of the later points or later items would be helpful, so that we're making developmentally appropriate recommendations. So thank you.
Lynn Scott.
Good morning. Let's see. Gong hei fat choi, kong shi fat chai. I want to say I'm here on behalf of COBTE, that's the California Association for Bilingual Teacher Education. And similar to Ivania's comments, I want to thank Executive Director Sandy and Terry Clark, Miranda Gutierrez for their work on the bilingual issues. And we'll be speaking a little bit more today in public comments on a couple of the items. But we're really looking forward to the bilingual working group that will kind of look at the standards for bilingual authorization over the coming year. We're going to start that work in the coming weeks. It might not be before you until next January, so it's possible it's a 2020 priority, but we wanted you to know that that's something that's working there. And also, when we talk about the child development permit a little bit later, we want to mention that it might be like the child development permit. There was a advisory group, kind of an expert panel that was assembled, and we might find this to be a priority this year, that we assemble kind of that dual language or bilingual advisory panel to assist the commission on its work, and the staff especially. Sometimes simply having a group accessible, knowing who to call, clarifies some of the language early on that just becomes edits later on. And similarly, the upcoming RECA panel that I think will be working later this month, I know there's another name for it, but having a person that's familiar with literacy from a dual language learner perspective, I think is helpful in those foundational stages. So we're glad to be part of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Danette Brown.
Good morning, Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. And I wanted to speak specifically to the last bullet on page GS2H1. And it says, working with the Attorney General's office and stakeholders to restructure the Commission's educator discipline process. And we're really pleased to see that, memorialized in writing, that and stakeholders part, because we really believe that while that happens most of the time, that outreach to stakeholders doesn't always happen. And there's an item agendized for this meeting that we'll be discussing tomorrow that we feel like our invitation got lost in the mail, and we weren't really part of the discussion around that agenda item. So we're really excited to see that and stakeholders part, because we really believe that we're better together, and having those conversations and working those issues out together will get us to a better place eventually. So thank you for having that in there.
Are there any comment or discussion or questions from the commissioners about our agenda for the year? Commissioner Brown?
I have a question about this. I know I've seen this before, but it's really great to have this in the table format. Thank you very much. But what I'm noticing is, for instance, in the performing arts, the performing arts work, it looks like it's both in the educator quality category and in the program quality and accountability category. And I thought to myself, well, that makes sense because you have to establish what teachers need to know and be able to do, and then you have to make sure that the programs provide that. And this is, but it looked like the child development permit piece was only in program quality, and I thought it was really an educator quality one as well, but maybe it doesn't matter. So I just wonder if you could just help me with those two categories, and maybe it doesn't matter where they get put as long as they get here.
Well, we want to make sure they're placed in the right set of expectations for you. So with theater and dance, we will be doing two parts of that work. Part of that will be the educator quality piece relates to developing the CSET exams for those. And the program quality relates to developing the program standards that go along with that. And I would say that with early childhood, the commission has not yet taken a step. I think when we get to the early childhood item, we're going to talk about if you adopt standards today, what is the next set of work that will need to be taken up. And one of the ideas that may come up is the idea of building some form of performance assessment system that would allow for a competency-based system to work there. But we're so early in the conversations here on this topic that we did not include that as a specific priority yet. That doesn't mean it won't come up and become a priority. This is what we know at the beginning of the year we'd like to undertake, but that grows, and much to the consternation of our staff, sometimes that grows because column 1 is pretty big and pretty heavy, and what we're able to do in column 3 is constrained by the resources we have. But it's on our mind, if not yet on our agenda, maybe on the agenda by the end of today. You never know. So thank you.
All right. Any other? Yes. Mr. Gonzalez?
I too want to thank you for the table. When I first looked at it, I wished our LCAPs were as concise and strategic as this. But along those same lines, I'm wondering, and either internally or as a visual, if maybe a fourth column would be the fiscal apportionment or allocation that shows us, okay, yes, there are resources to back a particular vision or initiative that we want to roll out. So just a thought, but thank you for the table.
I would just like to highlight and appreciate, it's in the category 4 on page 7, it's number 3 about the employee wellness events. And as we've already heard this morning, there's been a lot of accolades of staff, and I just appreciate, it seems like there's the culture here is positive, and I have seen over the years retention of people, and it's kind of a shout out to staff, and I was glad to see that there was something in here that recognizes and supports staff and their wellness, because we often overlook that in this field, I think, our own wellness. So I appreciate that item.
You know, sometimes paper airplanes are involved in that, so there's always food as well. So
good morning. As I was looking over this, I really like seeing it laid out this way. It's very clear, but it reminded me of when I started on the commission in 2011, and we had a retreat that included stakeholders and commissioners, and we talked about our strategic plan and our goals moving forward. And I think that now, looking around the table, the commission looks very different than it did in 2011. I think now might be a good time to go back and have another retreat where we can revisit our mission and our vision and see that the work that we're doing, and make sure that the work that we're doing is guiding us toward moving toward our vision as a commission.
I very much appreciate that, and we've been talking about that. It may be something that, as we move through the budget, and as we see what our budget looks like for the coming year, it might be something we try to schedule in the summertime to really capture new opportunities. Right? Yes, and so yeah, that's right. Rayleigh Field is right. Exactly. There are many things we could do that don't involve paper airplanes that build esprit de corps. So thank you for that suggestion. We'll work on that.
I just had a question, a rookie question. So this table is great, as everybody said, and I like the idea of the fiscal part of the table. But is there a process, and there may very well be, that does an accountability report? Because I hear like all this money's being spent, but do we come back and see and document how that money gets to students in the state, and then other resources?
Well, so we don't typically report on how this gets to students in the state. That's a pretty detailed pathway, I would guess, and that's not something we have taken up. You will see all of these items again at the end of the year when you evaluate our progress.
Right.
And so we will present you with a full update on the milestones that have been met in the at least columns 2 and 3
process.
So you'll have a sense of that, and to the extent that we can bring relevant impact information into that, I'll do so.
Thank you.
So let's get going. I now recess the general session and move to the Fiscal Policy and Planning Committee. Commissioner Martinez, will you please convene the committee?
Great, thank you.
And you generally come up there.
Oh, I come up there.
Yep.
Will be without my computer? I want to thank Commissioner Barnes for the service. I now convene the February 2019 meeting of the Fiscal Policy and Planning Committee. The committee has one information item before it today. 3A is the update of the governor's proposed 2019-2020 budget. Michelle Peralt will present this item. Ms. Peralt, will you please begin?
Good morning. Happy New Year. I'm just here to present an update on the governor's proposed 2019-20 budget. I had to double check my years because it feels like we're going so quickly. Governor Newsom did release his very first budget, the 2019-20 proposal, on January 10th. It was just a few short days after he had taken office. So overall, the governor in that budget is continuing to propose fiscal responsibility, much like Governor Brown did. However, he did make it clear in his remarks overall that he is supportive of education. You may have seen that he made some significant adjustments as it relates to higher education as well as early childhood education, which is very near and dear to his heart. So those were goals that he had committed to during his campaign, and we saw that reflected in his very first budget proposal. As it relates to the commission's budget, our budget actually remained fairly unchanged from our current 18-19 fiscal budget. Our proposed operating budget for 19-20 as it stands right now would be just over $29.6 million. If you did look into some of the details, for those of you that like to kind of dig down into those numbers, you might have seen that actually looked like a very large decrease from last year. Let me explain that, though. It is not a huge decrease as it relates to our ongoing budget allocation. Where you see that decrease is because if you'll remember last year, we were provided a large sum of money, one-time dollars, $125 million for grants to support the teacher shortages in residencies and local solutions. So that fell off. And then we also received a few other one-time projects that totaled just under $2 million that were one-time in nature last year. So those also are not reflected. But as it relates to our ongoing operational budget, it's fairly steady. So we did continue to receive, as we have for the past several years, an expenditure authority of just over $5.5 million, and that is to help with the work we do with the Attorney General's office in our discipline area. And we did receive I shouldn't say we received, but it was proposed. Let me remind folks, it was proposed, a allocation for $1.235 million. This, again, is a one-time proposed funding for us out of our own teacher development and assessment account. This would be to help us develop the special education teaching performance assessment. We've been discussing that here at the Commission. It's something the Commission would like to move forward and align it with the other performance assessments that we offer. So there is some proposed funding to help support that. In addition, that funding did also come with a full-time position. We don't see a lot of positions given, but I think there was a recognition that the work in and around all of our performance assessments is not only growing but will be ongoing. And so allocating some staff resource to that was placed in there. So if we receive that additional one position, our total authorized positions is now proposed at 144.6. I'm still trying to find the 0.6 person, but we have 144.6 in our permanent positions. So just some next steps. This is the beginning of the process as we have it every year. So the legislature will begin, and they're just starting now to schedule some of our what we call spring budget hearings. Like most often those begin in March and they run through May. And the subcommittees will meet. They'll meet with us. They'll discuss some of the needs that we have, some of the proposals, and then they will provide their recommendation. The governor then will take up his revision and present his May revision in the middle of May, at which time then the legislature has until June 15th to pass a full budget. I will say we did receive just late last week some additional what we call budget trailer bill language, and in that language we're still looking through it, but if you'll recall last year we also received some funding to, as Dr. Sandy indicated earlier, to update our assignment monitoring system to go from no longer paper to go into an online system. And so there is some trailer bill language that we just received in the budget to align some of the statutory language about that process with the new programming. We're still early and we're looking through some of that trailer bill language with the governor's office, with the Department of Finance and others to work through it. So I'm happy to take any either public questions or questions from the commission.
Great, thank you. We will now open for public comment, and I have one public comment card. Saret Kaminsky.
Good morning, Chair Darling Hammond, Executive Director Sandy, and esteemed colleagues. My name is Saret Kaminsky, Policy Director of Educational Services for CSESA, representing the 58 county superintendents. County offices of education play a key role in assignment monitoring, providing oversight to ensure California students are taught by properly credentialed teachers. Last week's trailer bill language proposes a new process where commission staff, instead of county offices, would be tasked with investigating all exception reports that may come with the annual monitoring of 10,473 schools. We are concerned with this trailer bill language. For those that are not as familiar with the monitoring process, in the initial audit of the data, any questions and potential inaccuracies are flagged as exceptions. Highly trained credentialing analysts in county offices work directly with district analysts to clear up any potential inaccuracies on each exception by seeking more information about teacher certifications and may even review class schedules. This currently occurs for 1/4 of California's districts. The State Assignment Accountability System, or SAS, is a brand new system that will now automate the process and provide data for all California districts each year. While it's anticipated that SAS will improve the largely paper-based system, there is no hard data, at least to our knowledge, of how many potential exception reports will come out with this year's data of 10,473 schools. Without county office analysts working directly with the 1,026 districts, is the CTC ready to assume this workload? We're also learning crucial lessons as California's dashboard and the statewide system of support continues to evolve. One of the main takeaways is the necessity of accurate CalPADS data, which requires consistent training to the field, and the crucial role of having highly trained professionals with programmatic knowledge to investigate possible discrepancies. We're concerned that a state agency would now be tasked with this role and wonder how this fits in with the overall statewide system of support, which recognizes county offices as a crucial partner to districts for technical support. County offices are providing an array of targeted supports to the 343 districts that were identified for differentiated assistance in the 2018 dashboard. How does this new SAS structure and procedure add coherence to the overall system? CSESA has enjoyed a collaborative relationship with Commission staff, and we look forward to a continued partnership that prioritizes the needs of California students. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions on this item? Commissioner Darling-Hammond?
I appreciated the comment, and I wonder if we can get a little more clarification about how the commission's role is painted in the trailer bill and what you understand about that.
No, happy to do so. As we mentioned, the trailer bill language came out just last week, so we have been in contact with the Department of Finance. Let me back up just to sort of give the commission sort of a picture of what we've been doing overall with assignment monitoring. As I mentioned, there was funding put into the budget last year to help us do the programmatic work to create a system that is electronic, and that is just starting to get underway with contractors. We just really started that work at the beginning of the calendar year, just last month. In the meantime, and you saw this last year, we did have a legislative bill to try to align the language statutorily with what the process would be using this electronic system. Throughout that process, we've been obviously working with stakeholders, and that has continued to be our intent. The bill did not move past all the way through the process last year. We actually, and Joshua Speaks will discuss this also tomorrow in his legislative report, but we do have a new bill this year to continue to try to get the statutory language aligned with the new programming, and quite frankly, just the language is out of date because it still refers to the API. So some of those pieces. That bill, we do have an author. We don't have a bill number yet. We're still early. But legislatively, we will continue to work that path with stakeholders. We've been working with all of the stakeholders along the way. The trailer bill language, sometimes we do see this where when the administration or the Department of Finance has provided some funding, they will help assist by providing trailer bill language to support that. And that, I think, is what's happening here. We are working with finance. Like I said, we just got it last week. We kind of provided the language to, we did provide the language to our internal staff. We're still working through kind of how does it differ from ours. Finance does have our language as well. And they've reached out to us to say, this is sort of our first attempt. They tried to keep it broad. Can you give us some feedback? So we're still in that feedback stage between everybody, but it is our intent, as always, to make sure that it's workable. I don't think I'm going outside of the box too far to say that it is not our intent that our staff have to take on this amount of workload. We don't have the resources to do that, and obviously we want to make sure that we're working with counties and districts who are the experts related to specific assignments in their district. So we're early in the process, and we're going to continue that back and forth, and our bill will continue on its path. The trailer bill language will continue on its path, and throughout the next month or so we'll be working to try to get those aligned, and hopefully we do end up at the end of this with something that works for everyone and gets our assignment monitoring in a much more efficient process.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, other questions from other commissioners? I have a question. Can you clarify, you were talking about the budget changes for this year, and you mentioned teacher residency, and that was no longer in the budget, I think is what I heard. Can you tell us a little bit about the teacher residency grant program that had been in the budget previously?
Yes. So let me clarify, and I'm glad you asked that, because I had made a mental note to say it a little bit differently than I did. So the funding was one-time in nature, meaning it was a huge amount of money. It was $125 million. It only appears in our budget as one-time funding, but that program is a 5-year program. So we are in year 1 of completing that grant process. For the local solutions, we just recently put out those awards. The residency, we are just still in the process of finishing doing the first round of awards. But for the residency program itself, which, if you'll remember, that's 75 of that 125 million. That is a 5-year program where we will have grantees receiving money potentially all 5 years. We may get new grantees as we go through the process. So it's one time in nature, but its impact is, it's not like it just went away and we're not funding it anymore.
No, that is super helpful. Thank you for that clarification. Other commissioners? Yes. Executive Director Mary Sandy.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to go back to some of the comments that Ms. Kaminsky raised and the question about The trailer bill itself frames the assignment monitoring work a little bit differently than our policy bill does. It's early. It's very early in the process, the legislative process, and we'll be working with the administration and with our stakeholders to see if we can reconcile this language in a way that really is going to work for the system. So I just didn't want Ms. Kaminsky to worry any more than she needs to about that with CISESA. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Questions from other commissioners? Ready? Nope. Okay. This is an information item. No action is needed. Thank you, Miss Peralt. This concludes business before the Fiscal Policy and Planning Committee. The committee is adjourned.
Well done. Next is the Educator Preparation Committee. Commissioner Rodriguez, will you please convene the committee? You can take one anytime. After the first so comfortable here.
Good morning. I'd like to call the February 2019 meeting of the Educator Preparation Committee to order. We have 6 agenda items. All 6 of the items are scheduled for today, and all public comments will be limited to 2 minutes. So please take note of the timer. The timer will go off at 2 minutes, and we'll ask you to finish your last sentence. Okay? Thank you. The first item today is 4.A, Initial Institutional Approval, Stage 2, Eligibility Requirements for Stella Middle Charter School. This item is being presented by Lynette Roby. This is an action item. Ms. Roby, will you please begin?
Thank you. So today I bring before you item 4A, and that is the submission of Stage 2, which is the eligibility requirements for Stella Middle Charter Academy, for your consideration and possible approval. Stella Middle Charter Academy is seeking program approval with the intention of offering an induction program. We don't have it up yet, but I'll just go ahead and continue. On the screen there will be, there it is. There is a table now that illustrates the 5 stages of initial institutional approval, and you'll notice that the one that is kind of pushed out and highlighted is Stage 2. This is the second stage of the 5 stages and is the stage in which an institution submits the 12 criteria of the eligibility requirements. And as a reminder, approval of Stage 2 of the initial institutional approval process does not allow an institution to offer an educator preparation program, but it only approves that institution to move forward to Stage 3. And at that time, they will submit they'll submit preconditions, common standards, and program standards for review. And once those are reviewed, they will come back to you for consideration again. We have with us today, representing Stella Middle Charter Academy, Alexandra Lee, Vice President of Academic Initiatives, and Marina Velez, Director of Teacher Induction and Development. And they'll be available to answer any questions that you have about their eligibility requirements. A copy of Stella Middle Charter Academy's complete eligibility requirement document can be found in the attachment, which was hyperlinked within the agenda. On page 4 of this item, you will find a table with staff recommendations for eligibility requirements 1 through 9 and summaries of the institution's responses to criteria 10, 11, and 12. Upon review of the responses and evidence provided by the institution for criteria 1 through 9, the staff recommendation for each of these is that of aligned. And beginning on page 7, you'll see the final 3 eligibility criteria for the Commission to consider. And those are criterion 10, mission and vision, criterion 11, history of prior experience and effectiveness in educator preparation, and criterion 12, which is capacity and resources. As you're aware, staff does not make a recommendation for these 3 criteria, but has provided the brief and summaries of the institution's responses for your review. For criterion 11, I just want to note the history of prior experience. The institution is also required for this one to post a third-party notification inviting comments on their website. They send the comments to us, I'm sorry, but they have to put that third-party notification on their website. To date, we have received no comments about the institution. So in light of the information provided in this agenda item regarding Stella Middle Charter Academy, staff recommends that the Commission consider taking one of the following possible actions: either granting eligibility so that they can move forward, or denying eligibility. If the Commission grants eligibility, it may identify topics that it will be looking for in Stage 3. If the Commission denies eligibility, it may identify what it sees as missing in the current submission in the event that the institution would decide to continue to work towards institutional approval. Staff's happy to answer any process questions, and again, we have the representatives from Stella Middle Charter Academy here to answer any program questions.
We will now open for public comment. Okay, seeing no public comment, the public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions on this item? Commissioner Olivi?
Can you give me some history as far as, is this the first time Middle Charter has had this kind of program before?
Hi, yeah, thanks for the question. So we currently have a mentoring program that does not lead to induction. In the past, we had worked with another district and where we were able to lead our teachers through induction. So now, since we are working on getting our own induction program created, we don't have that relationship anymore, and we're just trying to get our program as it exists ready for CTC's approval.
To your knowledge, is this the first of its kind that we have had to approve? Some history. I just wanted to know if this was a common way of going about it.
So the process is that whenever an institution has not been approved, is not a program sponsor in the state of California, they have to receive program approval, and that's if they want to run their own program. Stella Middle Charter Academy has not run their own induction program. That's what they wish to offer. So they have to go through the 5 stages of the process in order to be approved. Oh, no, we have had charters before, yes. There is a prerequisite in Stage 1 that institutions must either have accreditation from one of the regional accrediting bodies or be an LEA, which means they have the CDS code, and have approval from their governing board.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Commissioner Renaud-Shire?
Good morning. I appreciate that you've been working with the New Teacher Center to assist in the development of this program. Can you talk a little bit about faculty capacity who will be working in the program? Can you talk a little bit about the faculty who will be working in the program?
Sure.
And what their knowledge, skills, and experiences are.
Sure. So you're referring to the program leadership and also the mentors who will be working with teachers. I'm the leader of the program. My job description is in the application, but for a little bit of context, I was a teacher at one of our schools, and I taught before that. Then I was a mentor in our program for 2 years before becoming the director. We have the majority of our mentors are one-to-one mentors, and so they're site-based. They're teachers at their schools, and then they work on a stipend with usually one teacher. Sometimes they do work with 2 teachers. We also have a lead mentor who's a full release mentor, and she works at a number of our school sites with teachers. And then we also have 2 instructional coaches who are the director of their content area, so director of literacy and director of science, and they also work as mentors. That answers your question, yeah.
Commissioners, any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing no other comments or questions, this is an action item. Do I have a motion to either grant eligibility to Stella Middle Charter School and move forward to stage 3, or to deny eligibility? Commissioner Klatt? Okay, motion is moved by Commissioner Klatt. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Martinez, seconded. And now we'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, anyone opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations. You'll move on to the next stage. And let's see, thank you, Ms. Roby. We'll close this item. And we're going to take a little break right now, 10 minutes. So we'll be back here at 10:25.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know we're all like Googling them, weren't we?
Hear me?
That the Commission adopt the revised performance expectations and program guidelines as they are presented in this agenda item. If the Commission adopts the expectations and guidelines, staff would communicate these to the field and collaborate with interested program preparers to try these out and provide feedback to the Commission. Staff notes that we have already been contacted by several interested workforce preparers in this regard. If the Commission adopts these documents this morning, staff expects to get additional feedback from the field as a result of working with interested workforce preparers, and we will bring this feedback back at a future meeting. This concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have and to hear the Commission's discussion about these proposed documents.
Thank you. We will now open for public comment, and just a reminder, we're limiting public comment to 2 minutes. Our first public comment is Patricia Lozano, Executive Director, Early Edge, California.
Okay, good morning. My name is Patricia Lozano. I'm the Executive Director of Early Edge, California. We're an advocacy organization. I'm here to first thank the Commission and the team for all their work that they've done so far to, get feedback from different stakeholders to get where we are. We want to, as Early Edge, one of our priorities is dual language learners, and we saw a big change there where there is a lot more content, and we think it's a very good first step to bring to the attention to this important issue and to be sure that we're preparing the future workforce and supporting the current workforce on how to work with dual language learners. We want to be sure that this is perceived as an asset where, all kids should be exposed to bilingual classrooms and all teachers should be prepared on how to work with this population. We also support the, vision of moving towards a competency-based certification system where we really focus on what the workforce should know and how to assess those competencies. So, and at the same time, we want to be sure that our workforce is compensated if we're raising qualifications. So we hope that as we move to higher qualifications, we also keep in mind the compensation piece and advocate for it. And again, thank you for all your hard work, and looking forward to continue as a partner and as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is Jeanette Mulhern, CCC CCEC.
It's Tri-CECE.
If you'll please state your name and your affiliation.
Jeanette Mulhern, and I'm Vice President of Public Policy North for California Community College Early Childhood Educators, Tri-CEC. As the primary educators of early childhood education workforce, California Community College Early Childhood Educators would like to commend the Commission on Teacher Credentialing Educator Preparation Committee on their thoughtful process in creating and seeking input on the Child Development Permit, Candidate Performance Expectation, and Program Guidelines. We acknowledge the responsiveness to the ideas that we've brought forth from the California Early Childhood organizations and the integration of these ideas. We support the ideas of our college who serve in many capacities, our colleagues that serve in many capacities across the state, in incorporating key ideas into this document to help guide this process. We support the adoption of this document with the following items of attention going forward in this process. Tri-CECE requests continuing meaningful collaboration on the finalization of the document and the next steps in implementation. Tri-CECE acknowledges the work and the vetting of the Child Development Permit and asks that steps be taken to move this work forward. Tri-CECE would like to ensure that the work done on the permit thus far and going forward be used to guide any other policy implementation which seeks to increase the access to education for children 0 to 5. Further, we want to ensure that infants and toddler teacher preparation is not separated from preschool teacher preparation education. Tri-C-ECE requests that the unique needs of young children ages 0 to 8 and the related teacher practices and content be retained in this document and the finalization of the child development permit and any other related documents. In summary, we support the child development permit. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next comment, Tony Isaacs. And if you'll please state your name and your affiliation.
Good morning. This is Tony Isaacs. Is my mic on?
Turn it
Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is Tony Isaacs, Program Director of PEACH. We're a higher education collaborative of faculty from CSUs, community colleges, UCs, and private IHEs. And we wanted to state that PEACH is really appreciative of Phyllis and Aaron and all the hard work that they've done collaborating with stakeholders and revising these performance expectations and program guidelines multiple times in multiple venues. And we acknowledge that it must have taken thousands of hours of their careful research, attention, communication, and really working on the revisions and having a quick turnaround. We know that this work is critically important to our children and to the early childhood workforce and the quality of preparation and ongoing professional development. The track changes in the document was extremely helpful, and we do recognize that this draft has incorporated many of the recommendations that previously PEACH has made. And we want to thank you for that. We do feel that some of the language still needs to be nuanced, and some of the early childhood concepts need to be a little more ECE-centric. PEACH and many other stakeholders recognize that these proposed performance expectations and guidelines likely will play a critical role for professionals working in early childhood programs serving children birth through 8 for many years. And as such, we recommend that additional nuance of language and early childhood concepts be more ECE-centric. And with these proposed modifications, PEACH does support CTC's approval of the proposed TPEs, APEs, and program preparation guidelines contained in item 4B. And we look forward to working with CTC to implement these program preparation guidelines. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Jan Fish.
Good morning. I'm Jan Fish, co-lead consultant of PEACH, as described by Tony. I too, on behalf of PEACH, want to say thank you to both Phyllis and Aaron for the multiple hours and iterations of these TPEs. We see much more now the evidence of the ECE competencies in the current version of the TPEs. And to add to our PEACH recommendations, next steps, we would like to recommend that CTC invite the CD Permit Advisory Panel to collaborate with CTC staff to finalize the descriptions of the ECE concepts reflected in the key areas that have been outlined by Phyllis and Aaron in the document, item 4B. Just to give one example, play as characterized in the TPEs does not really reflect the nature and depth of the role of child-initiated play in learning. To just quote from the foundations, to be effective in accomplishing early learning goals, an active play-based program must allow children to freely choose and pursue interests and activities, both alone and with others. It must encourage them to translate their own thoughts, ideas, and preferences into new activities and experiments. This then infers that the ECE teacher's responsibility is to not only know development, but also to plan intentional environments that incorporate the teacher as co-investigator with the children, but also in a continual process of observing, reflecting on what they've seen, and then planning and modification.
Okay, thank you. If you could wrap up your last
I hear the
sentence.
ding ding. I do want to say that that as captured in the TPEs currently, one confusing statement was in all three job roles that describe or understand or describe and apply general principles of effective pedagogy for young children, including ways in which children's play as a teacher-guided, children-centered, intentional learning opportunity can contribute to children's learning, growth, and development. Does not capture where the intentionality is of the teacher, where it is the intentionality and the agency of the child.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
very,
you.
very much.
And next, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Jamie Kalanick of First Five.
That was about the closest anyone's ever gotten. My name is Jamie Kalanick. I'm with First Five Los Angeles. We would like to thank the Commission for its efforts in developing ECE performance expectations and preparation program guidelines, as well as for the commitment to continue to engage with the field throughout this process. First Five LA fully supports the movement towards a competency-based system that the performance expectations represent, and especially the use of the California Early Childhood Educator Competencies as a resource and guide. The early education workforce is diverse and therefore benefits from a diverse array of preparation and professional development pathways, not all of which touch or should touch the traditional higher education system or even the CTC's Child Development Permit. The ECE competencies thus represent a through line to ensure that all early educators, regardless of where they start, have the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to meet the needs of California's diverse child population without limiting those early educators' options for future educational and professional attainment. As the agenda item notes, right now is a time of unprecedented momentum in California to address the diverse and comprehensive needs of the state's youngest learners. The governor and legislature will continue to call on CTC for advice as they develop specific plans for a number of ECE-focused bills and the state budget. First Five LA, as well as I'm sure many of my colleagues here today, is ready and able to partner with you in furthering the Commission's work to support and train a highly qualified workforce that provides quality care and education to all of California's children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Antonia Lopez. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
My name is Antonia Lopez. I'm with the Campaign for High Quality Early Education, which is a coalition of advocates, higher ed professionals, practitioners, administrators involved in supporting dual language learners. It is a very important time for us. We have behind us the Prop 58, which allowed us to look at bilingual education and early learning. We have the governor's proposal to really expand the services to children, and we have 60% of the population that is affected by both of those things. We have commented in the past in writing and here at the Commission. We do want. With 2 minutes, I have to say quickly that unfortunately the present revision falls short in addressing our previous criticisms. One, there's still a reflection of deficit orientations toward dual language learners. As you'll note, there are at least 4 sections where dual language learners are lined side by side with special needs and other unique populations. We are not a unique population. We do believe that the developmental needs of the 0 to 3 population isn't adequately addressed. There is an inadequate job of addressing the needs of dual language learners who represent the 0 to 5 population in general. The National Academy of Science and in Medicine and Engineering in 2007 made it clear that that continued development of a child's home language is essential to the future success, including social and cognitive outcomes and academic achievement in English. To be more specific about the shortcomings, the DLLs are viewed as deficit. There is This is reflected in statements where DLLs are categorized alongside special needs populations. The educational goal is to become proficient in English in the 3 job areas. The goal is for English literacy, and it is not accompanied by
wrap up your last sentence. Thank you.
Accompanied by similar language to support home language. We have submitted our comments in a letter, so hopefully all the commission members will receive it. We do think this is an opportunity for us to address the shortfalls and the lack of understanding of the needs of dual language learners that we've all experienced in the past decades, and that we will be able to achieve a more appropriate education and support for our dual language learners.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonia. And lastly, Lynn Scott of CAPTE.
Lynn Scott, I'm the president of CAPTE. I also serve on the executive board of Californians Together. And one issue that has come up, and you heard it in public comments, is commending the work on developing these ECE TPEs. However, some terminology from the K-12 TPEs has filtered over into this. And I know the intention was that this was using inspiration from the K-12 TPEs, but that this was about early childhood education. Since 2012, the term used by the California Department of Education is dual language learners. So anytime you see English learners referenced in these TPEs, we feel that we need more than wordsmithing. We need to get the terminology correct, because as the executive director has said, this will be the basis for developing other things. So we are suggesting that you not accept these, approve these, until we clarify, and this could be done quickly, the terminology. So when you see in a series dual language learners, English learners, etc., it would follow California Department of Education guidelines that it would be dual language learners. I've been a faculty member in the CSUs for the past 7 years. I've taught child development. I also teach teacher candidates who will be elementary school teachers. And in working with them to meet the TPEs, it is very distinct. In early childhood, it is dual language development, home language development with English language development. That's very different. What we were under with Prop 227, the UNS initiative, which applied to K-12. That didn't apply to early childhood education. So we want to be very thoughtful in this terminology, and we would offer through this bilingual expertise to quickly help kind of work out some of this terminology so that isn't an issue going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Public comment for this item is now closed. And do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Commissioner Brown.
You know, I was going to say something, but I'm not going to get on a soapbox about this, because the work that's been done by the early childhood community in association with the staff has been substantial, has been long time coming, and has been thorough. And I think that that's a measure of the dedication of everyone that's in early childhood education that wants to adequately educate our youngest California citizens while we support their development. It is true that the early years have some special, unique qualities and need qualifications that affiliate with this. At the same time, I think it's really important to recognize, and the work group definitely did so, the panel, that we're trying to bridge into the public credentialing system the preparation so that we have standards for teaching and for programs to then to be able to prepare teachers to be public school teachers in early education. So while I think it's true that there are some unique pieces of that, and I think that they're included, I recognize that at the same time, it's time to get started. This is the moment for early childhood to become to move from being a stepchild to being a full part of the family of public education and credentialed teachers. So I, for one, really look forward to that.
Any other comments? Commissioner?
I just would like to emphasize and compliment Ms. Fish's words about child-initiated play and the importance of, in a program, developing a way for teachers to learn how to observe child-initiated play and how that is a capacity that is taught and learned and practiced, and how the TPEs really, I feel, need to reflect that. And so I would like to compliment her for those thoughts and thank her for that reminder. I hope we all take that deeply.
Commissioner Hind?
I don't think we need more research to show us how important early childhood education is on the development of children and how important it is to create students who then become adults who are fully educated and well-rounded. The only thing I think that we always forget to talk about, and one speaker did mention it, is the compensation piece. Because without the labor of love, where are you going to find people to sustain cost of living on $12 an hour? And not to mention how long it takes to get the permit and how much money you're spending going through the classes to become an early childhood educator. So while we have a governor who fully supports early childhood education, now might be a good time to push for fully compensated early childhood educators, and so that we can have a system that works for all students starting at age 0 and going up through 21 and beyond, or however far we can go, where the teachers who are teaching them are not only fully qualified but also fully compensated.
Any other commissioner comments? Darling Hammond?
I would just love to ask the staff to give us a little bit of feedback about some of the process and the way that we can incorporate, some of these recommendations. The child-initiated play, commentary, the use of dual language learners, etc. We're all feeling eager to get going. As Commissioner Brown said, the time is now. We need to kind of get moving. We know that it's going to iterate in some fashion as we get going. There are a few things that may be useful to incorporate right away, and others that will get refined as we go along. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about sort of where we are in process, what's been accommodated, what can be accommodated in the near term and over time, so that we can make a good decision about how to get going.
Yes, thank you for that. And you did hear from the stakeholders that staff has really tried very hard to work very closely with these folks, and we do have an open line of communication with them, which I think is a really positive thing, and I believe they do as well. I think it's important to remember that these documents, as with any of the Commission's adopted documents, for instance, your standards, your other performance expectations, these are living documents, and they may be revised and revisited at any time that the Commission would like to do that. That said, staff does anticipate, as we continue to come back to you with the work that still needs to be done, right? We need to take a look at the recommendations of the panel around the permit and find out where those recommendations do and don't dovetail with the competencies. We need to take a look at how we may evaluate where the competencies are being delivered, et cetera. So the staff will be back to you at several times, many times, I suspect, actually, in the future. And we hope to be able to continue to bring you revised documents as we work with the field and learn more from the field that continue to reflect some of these really important needs and the important feedback from the field.
And I'd just like to add, with regard to some of the specific comments that were heard today, and we very much appreciate the guidance that the field is offering us. I heard it mentioned that some individuals felt that there might be a perhaps deficit orientation towards English learners or dual language learners. That was certainly far from any intention that we had. if inadvertently that was in there, then certainly that would be something that we would address and could do so right away. We looked very carefully to make sure that we weren't doing that, so I'm a little disappointed to hear that, but certainly we can fix that. As far as listing English learners in a list of students with various characteristics, you know, that one we went back and forth on because we tried the approach of saying all students, because we really mean all students, and that would include students with every type of characteristic. But because I think this field is not familiar as the rest of the K-12 world might be with how our standards and our performance expectations are phrased, they felt that it would be lost if they didn't see some of these particular groups listed. And so we tried to strike a balance. We went with all students, but then we wound up actually putting some lists in. If people feel that the English learners were inadvertently misplaced in the list, it certainly, again, was not anything intentional. We just wanted to signal to the field that this was not something that we were intending to overlook in any way in preparation. As far as the terminology, if we have an incorrect terminology, of course, that's something that can be easily fixed. And as far as the child-initiated play that I heard, you know, I struggled and struggled with this because when we would have meetings with the field, we would get certain language that we said, yes, this is the language. And so we would incorporate that language. But as I said in my presentation, there are diverse viewpoints, and some viewpoints had different ways to express the same concept. So once again, if we missed the mark in some way, I think these are fairly easy to address. If the language itself is slightly incorrect, but the concept behind it, the idea behind it, is something we want to include in these standards, and I didn't hear anyone say that we had any wrong ideas per se, we can massage that language to make it fit what the guiding thoughts behind the intent were.
Commissioners, any other comments? No? Commissioner Darlene Hammond? Commissioner Cooney?
You're getting really good. I just blink differently. You know, this is an area in which I've been privileged to work, and I'm learning myself about the lack of early childhood educators' education. And I really think, no. The work that's been done by our staff and the field to date is very considerable, all in the right direction. Now it seems that it could be improved from a wordsmithing standpoint. I don't know how important that is in terms of time. I think it is important to move this along and keep our process. The field is very wide, it's diverse, and I think it could use direction. So for me, it's less important to take more time and fine-tune the language at this point rather than accept the staff's recommendation at this point and move forward.
Take the time to refine the language, you're saying?
I think it's more important to move forward, adopt it as is, recognizing it could always be improved. You know, if we improve some of it, we would have people coming next session in April and telling us, you know, we think you've missed this point. But the bigger picture is the field needs the direction, and that's what I would support.
Can I echo that sentiment? Because I think that the staff comments led me to believe that when in a socially negotiated process, when they reach a point where they're trying to make trade-offs, ultimately improvements become more marginal. And when you reach a marginal place of improvement, I wonder if the time adds as much value. And so I particularly appreciated both the comments about the concerns, but then how we heard staff balancing them.
Commissioner,
I would say it's better to move forward and continue to have a living document, but to move forward.
Commissioner Hind has a question.
I just have a question. So if we were to move forward, as suggested by Commissioner Cooney, and you said it was a living document, so would we be able to continue to change words as we move forward without, so what we could actually start right now? Is that what I'm hearing?
Let me just add some color to that. I think that, as Dr. Jacobson has already said, if there are incorrect usages of the word English learner, and we need to update those uses to appropriately reflect dual language learners, that's an easy fix, and you could adopt and direct us to make those fixes, and that would happen. If you want to make sure, again, that child-directed play is adequately underscored here, you could also make that a condition of your adoption. So, and it will remain a living document, and we'll have multiple opportunities yet to see how they play, see how these work in the field, see where clarification is needed, and bring that back to you for amendment as needed as it moves forward. But I can really appreciate the points that you're making, commissioners, about the need to move forward. I mean, the perfect is often the enemy of the good. And having a standard that communicates the universe, your sense of the universe, to the field, that needs to develop programs, that sets a backstop for next items we bring forward about the permit structure itself, about how we accredit or approve programs in the future. I mean, all of this hinges on what is the standard. So adopting a standard, directing us as you think appropriate for amendments right now, and keeping the question open for amendments that need to be brought back, all of that can be accommodated with an adoption today, if that's your goal.
Chair Darlene Hammond, did you want to? Okay, excellent. I was going to ask if you wanted to make a motion.
I think I'm hearing sort of some clarity around at least the couple of points that I mentioned, that we want to be sure that as we adopt this living, breathing document, we want child-initiated play to be clear in the context, and dual language learners. Sometimes they're going to be triple language learners and so on, but we can stick with dual for the moment. I knew that would get you, Lynn, because he always comes and speaks 5 or 6 languages at the table. But we do want to be sure that there are other comments that were made in the documents that we received. So, and we know the staff is open to continuing to evolve those. I guess the question that we need to consider is whether we endorse these and say move forward, but we want to see the another version at some point in time, or adopt, and we know that it will iterate. So I would like some guidance actually from the staff or from Mary about how we word the motion to keep it moving, but also be responsive to the wordsmithing.
So my sense is that the word adopt has more clarity and oomph behind it. That's a technical term, than endorse. And I think that if you endorse, and that's perfectly acceptable, depending on how much more work you'd like us to do on these things, it creates a sense of ambiguity in the field about what these are and whether they're ready for work on them. And I think the field is clamoring. I certainly hear this from our colleagues in the community college system, that when will we have something we can work with, because they're eager to take this work up. If you adopt
them to be able to get going,
I think there is a sense in which we don't want to hold them up. I mean, the academic year begins in August, September, and if programs really want to start aligning their curriculum to something, ideally they've been looking at this and doing some of that work already, but they need some confirmation from us that this is the direction we're heading in, and they can begin to do that work. We still have some major discussion in front of us about what should the structure of the permit itself be, and what kind of accountability system do we think should back these standards. Right now we review transcripts to make sure courses that are titled correctly are on the transcripts, and then we issue a permit based on a review of course titles. All right, so that's a very old system that needs to be replaced with a more qualitative system. But until we have standards that define what the content of this preparation should address and what competencies we're trying to achieve, we can't begin to build that system. And our programs, I would say, this field has been so eager to get a set of standards in play that they could work with to shape preparation to improve quality across the board, that it's, I think we all sense an eagerness to move forward. So I think you can endorse it's a more ambiguous status for this. I think it will also invite every other stakeholder who wished they had gotten a word in here but didn't. That'll open the door to come on in and bring that word, and let's see how long we can wordsmith. We could work on this for another year or two, because you never get complete consensus. What you get is the best consensus you can achieve in the context, and I think that's really where we are with this document, and with the sense that there are some things we can correct, and we will do that. Or you can adopt, and it's a more direct message, but adopt with direction to us to bring appropriate changes to you for further amendment as needed, and we will do so.
Are we ready for a motion, Commissioner Darlene Hammond?
Yeah, I think I would like to move that we adopt with those changes I mentioned earlier, the two, and we instruct the staff to bring it back to us with further amendments as you work with the stakeholders.
I just wanted to, one of the speakers had mentioned, I've been looking for in the document, I can't find it, having a concern around bilingual, children who are bilingual being listed along as a disability. Did I read that right? Did I hear that right?
That was a concern. The way that dual language learners has been referenced in the competencies is we have listed them as Phyllis stated earlier. Initially in the competencies, we said these are meant to address all students. And then there were groups who said, we really want to make sure that certain students are called out. So then we started to sort of enumerate or list these students. And some of those students include students with special needs, and some of them include dual language learners. And so we listed the dual language learners sort of as part of that list. And there's concern by the field that it somehow sends a message that dual language learners are sort of at need rather than have an asset.
So that was my question. What I did find in the document, and it's big, so I might have just missed it, was we want to meet the needs of all students, needs that could include high achievement, low achievement, gender, race. And what I didn't see was we want to meet the needs of students with disabilities, including bilingual. Okay.
No, you wouldn't find it that way. That's correct.
I'm hoping I wouldn't find it that way, but that's what I just want to clarify before we. Okay.
So I would just like to add, I wasn't going to do this, but since it came back up, I'd like to do this. I really want to reject the idea that any of these are deficits. Not any of these things are deficits. But these students have been underserved in our state, and we've got dashboards in Technicolor that tell us who's been underserved. And if we don't call our workforce to attend to the needs and the assets that these students bring to the environment, they won't do it. So I respectfully to the faculty and the concern about calling out a need as a need, I don't ever want to do that, and I don't think this commission is ever part of making a list like that and considering that a deficit. Those are all things that we can't allow ourselves to forget, and they are too often forgotten. In fact, in our performance assessment work, we call out and require our teachers and their TPAs to identify the assets and needs that students bring to the learning environment and to focus specifically on English learners, the assets and needs that they bring to this environment, and how they're going to adapt their teaching to address those and incorporate those assets. We do the same thing. Call out, find a student who brings a special need, who is on an IEP or a 504, tell us what assets they bring and how that's going to impact your teaching and incorporation of those assets. The same thing with other students who might bring some other fragile characteristic that are quite often ignored and forgotten in our classrooms and underperforming as a result of that. I think this is an opportunity to call this out and call people to attend to the assets of these communities and to not forget that we have to serve them. So I'm sorry, that's more passion than I usually bring to this table, but
Thank you for that. Commissioner Hine, did you have a comment?
I just want to say I'm really glad it did come up again, because that is such a great reminder for everybody in the field to not look at students with any sort of need, whatever it is, as a deficit. That These are all students, so thank you for that.
Commissioner Greneau-Shire?
I wasn't going to say anything either, but since Director Sandy brought this up, I was sitting here feeling uncomfortable with the comment that the association between students with special needs and dual language learners was somehow something we'd want to avoid. So I really, really appreciate how you framed it. So as we think about revising this, if we can think about assets, needs, and underserved populations, I would be much more comfortable with that kind of language. And it really puts the onus of responsibility on the adults in the room to meet the needs of all learners in their classrooms. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you for a very rich discussion. We do have a motion on the floor and a second. So unless there are any more comments, we'll call for a vote. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, we are moving on to item 4C, concurrent bilingual authorization candidates and the teaching performance assessment requirement. This item is being presented by Amy Rising and Miranda Gutierrez. In this item, there are two key questions with respect to concurrent bilingual candidates and how they might respond to the TPA in light of ADS requirements. The staff would like direction on these questions and what we think about these two questions. So as you listen to the presentation, I will remind you again of this when we get down to the direction. Thank you. Thank you. So Ms. Rising, will you please begin?
Of the credential and the authorization at the same time, and how they should complete the teaching performance assessment requirements. The TPA requires candidates to demonstrate their readiness to teach using evidence collected or developed in the context of their student teaching placement, including obviously residencies and or internships. For concurrent bilingual credential candidates, however, their teaching context may be in a setting, particularly at the early primary years, where English is not the primary language of instruction. The Commission's assessment design standards, which govern our development of the TPAs and all TPAs coming forward to you, require candidates to address the teaching of English learners as well as the development of literacy. But the ADS, or Assessment Design Standards, do not provide clarity or guidance for candidates and placements where English is not the language of instruction. This item provides background information and options for your consideration regarding how those assessment design standards could be interpreted or revised or amended to address the instructional context of concurrent bilingual candidates and how these candidates should provide their responses within the engagement of a teaching performance assessment. Education Code 44320.2 requires all preliminary multiple and single subject candidates to pass a TPA as one requirement for earning their credential. To implement this statutory requirement, the Commission adopted the assessment design standards years ago to govern the design of assessments that measure performance with respect to the teaching performance expectations. Preparation programs are responsible for addressing the full scope of those teaching performance expectations, and they do this by having candidates attend coursework. They put them in appropriate field placements, and they have program level assessments for them to engage in. These multiple measures at the program level supports and experiences and passing a TPA. So both the program, fieldwork, and TPA All of these together assist candidates in becoming effective teachers before they receive their preliminary credential. The problem statement before you in this item is this. 2 elements of the assessment design standards specifically require all commission-approved teaching performance assessments. We have 3 approved assessments. They need to, first of all, assess the candidate's ability to effectively teach English learners. We put that in our assessment design standards. And in the case of the multiple subject candidate, that candidate would need to address both literacy and mathematics in their TPA submission. The design standards are spelled out for you in your item, but just so I'll just go over them with you quickly because we probably don't all have them memorized. So 1D says the model sponsor must include within the design of the TPA candidate tasks that focus on addressing the teaching of English learners, all underserved education groups or groups that need to be served differently, and students with special needs in the general education classroom to adequately assess the candidate's ability to effectively teach all students. 1E says, for the multiple subjects candidate, the model sponsor must include assessments of the core content areas of at least literacy and mathematics. Programs use local performance assessments for history, social science, and science if they're not already included in the TPA. So we have those 2 statements in our assessment design standards. Candidates who are concurrently earning a multiple or single subject teaching credential and a bilingual authorization simultaneously may be placed in a variety of settings for their student teaching, residency, or internship, or other clinical practice where they're completing their TPA. So given that situation, language use for instructional purposes across these types of bilingual education program settings might vary. So at that local level in that school building, candidates may be placed in an immersion setting where no English is used, right? Or in a bilingual setting where English may be used but only for part of the day and for a subject that is not a core subject area of literacy or math. In a bilingual setting where English may be used but only for one particular core academic subject area, for example, math, etc. So all kinds of different placements and settings that our candidates are in doing the TPA. Given this range of placement options, it would be challenging for concurrent bilingual credential candidates to demonstrate effective teaching of English learners as specified in 1D. In addition, it could be challenging for multiple subject candidates to address the assessment design standard 1E requirement to address literacy and math in their TPA response if literacy is interpreted to mean literacy in English. During the early years of implementation, the TPA was locally administered and scored by teacher preparation programs, which allowed significant variation across programs and support to candidates, so that they were supported in that placement as they engaged with the TPA. As the Commission began its work years ago, revising and updating the TPEs, the Teaching Performance Expectations, and the Assessment Design Standards, and Cal TPA, your sponsored model, which began back in 2015, feels like yesterday, members of the bilingual teacher preparation community requested that the Commission relieve concurrent bilingual candidates from translating their assessment materials for the TPA into English, allowing them to instead submit completed TPAs in the language of instruction, because there were assessors that could engage with that language. Clarifying the Commission's intent regarding the teaching of all language learners in the role of English in developing student literacy for multiple subject and single subject credential candidates will help the field to provide appropriate support to concurrent bilingual credential candidates as they complete and submit their TPA. So there are 2 important questions that help identify the areas where your input and direction are needed. So this will guide implementation of TPAs for these concurrent bilingual candidates. So the first question for your discussion is this: may concurrent bilingual credential candidates focus on English development? Oh, sorry. May concurrent bilingual credential candidates focus on language development for students in a language other than English, so in that primary language of instruction, within the content area of their preliminary multiple or single subject credential? Or must all candidates for a teaching credential demonstrate through a teaching performance assessment that they can effectively teach English learners in English? So that's sort of a two-part first question. The second question is, must the multiple subject TPA literacy task required by the ADS be, the assessment design standards, be completed in English? Or may this task focus on literacy development in the language of instruction? So that is our second question. I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Gutierrez, who's going to walk you through some additional factors for your consideration.
So as Ms. Rising just shared the questions, there are some factors to consider with these questions. And so as she mentioned already, the assessment design standards do require that candidates demonstrate an ability to provide instruction to English learners. The preliminary program is already responsible for helping candidates learn, practice, and demonstrate competence on the TPEs, especially those that are not already assessed on the TPA. So for concurrent bilingual candidates who may be in a placement where English is not the primary language of instruction, it's a possibility that the program could be responsible for assessing their ability to provide instruction to English learners. Programs would be responsible for providing the coursework, fieldwork, and assessment for those candidates so they can demonstrate their ability to provide effective instruction to English learners. Another requirement of the assessment design standards that Ms. Rising mentioned is that the TPA must assess a multiple subject candidate's ability to provide literacy instruction. However, she mentioned also that assessment design standards do not specify if literacy means literacy in English. So again, those concurrent bilingual candidates who are in a placement where they're not speaking English for a large portion of the day, this provides another opportunity for the preparation programs to assess the candidate's ability to provide literacy instruction within the program, not necessarily in the TPA. So some research to consider that might be helpful for this conversation and discussion is the literature on language transference. It's the concept that knowledge and skills in one language support the development of similar skills in another language. And also the research on bilingual learners found that there are universal literacy skills and concepts that learners acquire regardless of their home language of instruction. So with the growing research on literacy development and transference, would it meet the intent of the assessment and design standards to allow concurrent bilingual candidates to complete the TPA focusing on the language development of their students? And of course, the programs would still be responsible for assessing the candidate's ability to instruct English learners outside the TPA, which has happened through program assessments. And Amy's going to discuss a few more key points in the item.
All right, thank you. So we did want to point out that in order to interpret TPAs that are submitted in another language other than English, we would need to have assessors that were fluent in all of our wonderful array of languages that we speak in California. And so I just wanted to point out that in your model-sponsored Cal TPA, the Commission's model, as part of our first full operational year, of administration, we have had bilingual candidates submit work, and we have identified and found assessors in all of the languages that we need to have so that candidates can go ahead and submit their TPA in their setting. It's their choice whether they would submit to us in English or in any of the languages, and that they would not need to translate the video, for example, components. So there are, I'll get this out of order. So we have a table for you in your item where we have provided 4 options to help kind of illustrate ways that this could be approached. This is not intended to be an exhaustive list, and there may be other strategies or ways to approach supporting candidates in their field placement as they engage with the TPA, but there are 4 presented for your consideration. So I'll give you a minute to just kind of make sure you've had a chance to look at that table. You know, obviously each option has benefits and challenges that come with it, And some may mean that we need to revise our assessment design standards, and some do not require any change. All right. So finally, the staff requests that the Commission discuss the questions as well as the options and implications identified in this agenda item regarding the situation of concurrent bilingual candidates in the that are working towards their multiple subject credential and their bilingual authorization, or in their single subject area also working towards their bilingual authorization within the TPA process, and provide guidance or direction to staff. And then, of course, depending on how you guide us, we will prepare an agenda item to bring back to you with strategies for you to potentially adopt and take action on. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rising. We'll now open for public comment. And our first public comment is Ivania Soto. If you would please come up and state your affiliation for the record.
Ivania Soto with the California Association for Bilingual Education. And our position is that literacy is literacy in any language. And since our candidates are not just literate in English, but also biliterate and bilingual, they should be able to demonstrate literacy competency in any language. With that being said, we prefer options 1 and 2, with a slight preference for option 2, as it emphasizes work with an English learner, which we feel has been watered down by the elimination of TPE number 7. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next comment, Rigel Massaro.
Good morning, Commissioners. Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates. I really appreciate this discussion and the citation of the strong research around language transference, and want to just put, for us, this is in context of the teacher shortage and teacher diversity in the state, and ensuring that particularly our highest need students, English learners, have access to qualified bilingual programs and educators. We do have some concerns about option 3, given our concerns, and do think that although all the options obviously align with statute, we do see 2 as sort of best aligned to the greatest number of the statutory options for teaching English learners. Look forward to the Commission's next steps on this item and appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next, Lynn Scott.
Hello again. I everything that I'm doing before. Okay. Well, I've got a busy day. I feel guilty. I'm Lynn Scott from COBTE. I feel guilty when I send a letter, offer an email to Executive Director Sandy, because I know she gets so many emails every day. And so this is one of those that has percolated over several years. And the staff has laid it out excellently. These are the issues in the 34 approved programs across the state that I'm hearing from my colleagues when my inbox fills up. Make sure you tell them that this is the issue we're having at San Jose State. Please tell them that at Holy Names University, this is our issue. At a point, Loma Nazarene, this is the issue we're having. So I do want to suggest that option 3, while it's there as an English only, these TPAs were starting the development in 2015, but in 2016 we passed Prop 58, so the UNS initiative is no longer relevant. I wanted to mention that as a new bilingual teacher some 25 years ago, at Thanksgiving dinner on the farm, Uncle Jake said, I know you're a bilingual teacher, but I just have a question. Why don't you just teach them English? So, may he rest in peace. I said, shall I talk about language transference? And maybe if you learn your home language well, you will learn English even better, deeper, quicker, and maybe through bilingual education, there's less time spent than if you were in English submersion. I couldn't say that to Uncle Jigs, but this is the issue. So oftentimes we hear English learners, we still make this UNS initiative notion that teaching an English learner obviously has to occur in English. And I want us to think bilingual learner, dual language learner, that you have to teach them appropriately. It may be in English or it may be in another language. Thank you.
Okay. Public comment for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Commissioner Brown.
It's really great to hear all of the public comments, but I'm confused about there's 1A and 1B, and then there's 2 and 3. So when the speakers have been saying they want 1 and 2, they like 1 and 2, was that both A and B and 2? I was trying.
Are you talking about in the graph, the chart that they included? Yes.
Here.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a little confused. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not the only one.
Can I? Yeah. I think I can do a quick clarification that option 1 is about teaching in the language of instruction. And if you're in an immersion setting, that could be whatever language. Option 2 is would require bilingual concurrent candidates to have an English setting where they can work with an English learner. And option 3 would require that all materials be translated into English. So we go from everything could be submitted in the language of instruction is 1A. 1B is teach and do your work and collect your student work in the language of instruction, but write your own reflections in English. And that's the distinction between 1A and 1B. Yeah? Okay.
I think we wanted also to know when people were endorsing options.
I see.
Sure. Ivania Soto, if you wouldn't mind coming back up. I understood that you said that you liked 1, but 2 was good because it included ELD students.
Yes. Was that 1B? Or was that 2? Was that? No, 2. So 2.
2. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And is Rigel Mazzaro still here? If you would, please remind us of your preference.
I was just commenting that there are 4 grounds in statute for teaching English learners. And so to me, option 2 aligned with sort of the broader majority of those statutory options. I am not an EL expert, but that's what I was trying to say.
Thank you. Lynn Scott, if you wouldn't mind coming back up and.
I need 100 minutes a day. 1A or 2 is what I'm hearing from the field. I personally probably have a preference for number 2. I wouldn't suggest 1B simply because I think we need to allow our bilingual candidates to provide their commentary in either English or the target language. 3 definitely was a no from the field.
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Wall, Darlene Hammond, that's. Yes, I'm calling on you.
Uh-huh. Okay. Each of these has their own complexities, and I just want to give us a chance to understand those. I hear the preference for 2. I also, though, am guessing that if you all have to do both, if you're in an immersion setting, but you also have to have an experience with an English teaching ELD, so to speak, in a different context, that you might have to have a separate placement. Is that, talk to us about what the, are there issues with two around placements that we need to be cognizant of that would make it hard for programs, or will programs be able to fit that all into one placement?
On it. So if they're in a placement, particularly in a kindergarten, first, second grade, we've heard from the field in our discussions, and they're in a full immersion setting for that day they're there, or portion of the day they're there, then it puts the candidate in an awkward position because they don't and are not focused on thinking about literacy development in English using ELD strategies for that person, because they're actually speaking in Spanish and they're trying to improve Spanish literacy, or German, or whatever they're teaching in. So that, I believe, is the concern that I have heard and have discussed with programs. Some of our speakers who came from field might want to add to that, but that's my understanding, that's where it could be tricky.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
So I just wanted to share, we have a 90-10 dual immersion program in our district. And so in thinking about this item, I reflected how would it impact placement in our district. It wouldn't affect placement for the sense that we deploy for designated ELD. And so even though the 90% Spanish model only delivers instruction in Spanish during the designated ELD, she's part of the rest of the kindergarten or first grade, or second grade ELD deployment component. So they have an opportunity within that placement through designated ELD to do language development. In addition, in our program, scaffolds up. So by the time they get to third grade, they are in a 70% enrollment, language acquisition component. And then there's exposure, and depending whether it's a 90-10, 50-50, then there's the inverse where one teacher becomes the English model or the Spanish model in a specific content area. So I think the placement component is doable within the existing models that many of us have. Now, if there's a time allocation, that so much time in regards to placement, that could be a greater issue. We try to allocate 40 to 45 minutes.
Time allocation for like the assessment? Oh, yeah.
We don't specify.
I don't know. I am not aware of.
Okay.
I think it just depends on the program, the placement, the language. A lot of variables impact that. So we seem to have gotten a whole array of responses to how candidates experience field placement.
Commissioner Darling Hammond?
No, go ahead to Margaret.
Does option 1A and 1B allow the greatest flexibility for programs in terms of placement options?
I would say yes, because the candidates with those options, would be able to complete the TPA in their placement. Option 2, the programs would need to locate an additional placement depending on the level of the.
Some might and some might not, right? That's what we're hearing.
Thank you.
Director Sandy, did you want to say something? No? Any other comments? Commissioner Wall?
So as a person who helps, I have staff responsible for placement. What is key in my view here is that we know what is needed, right? So we could accommodate different things if we know, in fact, what we're after. So the point that I think we shouldn't lose is, what do we want more, right? Do we want the competency to be displayed as people working with EL learners, or is it just about the transference of competency? Because ultimately, we have to, as a program, make sure that the placement is correct, right? And so that, I think, is our responsibility, but the guidance is essential.
Okay.
Commissioner, Executive Director Sandy?
I always appreciate promotion. I think that the assessment design standards, when they were initially written, and this is more than a decade ago, anticipated that, or privileged that every single teacher who gets a multiple or single subject teaching credential should have to demonstrate that they can work with English learners, and did not anticipate or speak to the issue of, is language development in any language, does that suffice? Does that meet the objective of you can do language development with English learners or with Spanish learners or with Vietnamese learners in the language of instruction? So this hinges on the issue that Miranda Gutierrez raised about transfer and whether we think literacy development in any language would lead us to allow bilingual concurrent candidates to demonstrate that they can work with language learners in the language of instruction. What I'm hearing from some of our field people from the field who are speaking here is that we shouldn't lose the ELD, actual ELD specific requirement. What Commissioner Gonzalez has said is that in his 90-10 situation, there would be opportunities in an immersion program for a dual or bilingual credential candidate to have access to that space and those students to do ELD. What I don't know, and forgive me because I wish I did and should know this, is whether there are full immersion programs out there that 100% of instruction, 100% of the time is in English. And if a teacher is placed, let's say, in a residency program, excuse me, did I say in English? I meant in Spanish or in the language, in a different language other than English. If those environments exist, and let's say someone is in a residency program and that's their classroom assignment, how do they get access to demonstrate they're working with an English learner on ELD? So I really think it comes down to the question here of, do you want to reinforce the prior commission's decision that ELD is non-negotiable for all candidates? And that's perfectly legitimate position for you to take, and I think you've gotten some good feedback about why that might be appropriate, if that's where you want to go.
Chair Darling Hammond.
So I've found this conversation really helpful in clarifying, what is it that we want people to be able to do, right, is kind of the first question, and then programs figure out the placements. So thinking about it that way, I think that I agree with virtually everyone said option 2 makes a lot of sense. I mean, there is an expectation that a person with that credential will be able to work in different contexts. They're getting credentialed, to work both in an ELD context and in a bilingual context. So I think option 2 accommodates that. I'm also aware that, the politics of language goes around and around. And so I'm old enough to remember many eras. And I think that the notion in 1B that that some part of the, and it's also in number 2, I think, that some part of the TPA should be submitted in English is appropriate, because at some point somebody's going to come around and say, you mean you have a TPA in which the candidates never write anything in English, and we don't even know if they can write in English, and so on. And we've got, that conversation is may not be happening this moment, but it will be happening again at some point. And I think so. I think we should. I would probably want to encourage us to move towards number 2, and to be sure that maybe it is the reflection at the end of the TPA that is always written in English, so that there is some component where we have that covered. I guess in number 2, you would automatically be writing that portion about the ELD component of it in English, so that might cover my concern there. But I think that we do have an expectation in the credential that people are teaching English language development, and we have an expectation of bilingualism. We should meet those expectations in the TPA and be sure that there is some portion.
Any other, Commissioner Greneau-Shire?
Could the staff talk a little bit more about the challenges associated with option 2 if the candidates are in the intern or residency program. I'm worried, given the recent investment in residency programs, how that will play out if option 2 is approved.
So if you're in a residency program or an internship, you are in the classroom you're in. So the question becomes, what classroom are you in, right? And part of this is due to the way the residency program is set up. And it's a little different with interns because that usually is due to where there isn't a classroom that needs a teacher. And then it all depends on what kind of program is the school engaged with. Is it 90-10? Is it 50-50? When does it start and at what grade? And at what grade level is our resident teacher or our intern placed? So it's a complicated question. I think for the commission's model, I can speak to the Cal TPA most easily. The candidates, let's just take an example. If a resident was in a first grade classroom in a bilingual setting where it was 90-10, and they were expected to teach in Spanish, and they were also, at the same time, they're going after their authorization, and they're becoming a multiple subjects teacher. In the Cal TPA, in Cycle 1, they're asked to identify an English learner and provide ELD support to that English learner. So the question is, in that 10% of the day, can they do Cycle 1 in our model? So that is like a direct kind of thing I puzzle out as we have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to your guidance so that I can go back with my team and figure out how we make sure that candidate is not the one caught not being able to perform well on the assessment, because we're measuring things that take us back to the questions in your item. May concurrent bilingual candidates focus on language development in a language other than English? And if that's the case, we have to kind of probably revise our language in different places around what we're measuring and what the ADS says we have to design our assessment to do. So I think that for now, that's the best I can answer your question. I mean, we can certainly continue to look at how many candidates this might affect. Right now, it's a fairly small number, but we know we're looking to really encourage the growth of bilingual education. It's very important. And I think there's a lot of demand for bilingual education. So we want to support our candidates in that regard. So that's just, I really do think, though, it comes back to these two questions that we're seeking advice about, which is, whether or not concurrent bilingual credential candidates focus on language development for students in a language other than English within the content area of their preliminary multiple or single subject credential, or is teaching demonstrated in a TPA that they can, or must all candidates show us that in the TPA? And then for multiple subjects, is literacy, English literacy or any literacy? So these are the questions that we need to answer. So then we can come back to you with recommendations about how we might change the ADF, the assessment design language, how we might look at our TPEs even that specifically state this. So I think the whole conversation circles around this, and then of course it comes back to placement. As you said, you need to know as programs so you can make the best placements for your candidates so that the candidate is not caught in a position where they can't possibly respond to our assessment. That would be a very bad outcome for our candidates, and we really must avoid that. So,
Commissioner Hind?
I just had a quick question, thinking off of what Commissioner Green-Ashara was talking about. If you were in a situation where you were an intern or in a residency situation where you were stuck with whatever classroom you got, so not necessarily a placement issue because you're doing a kind of a different pathway, would it be possible to fulfill the Cycle 1 requirements in a setting that was, say, an after-school program or a lunchtime program or some other time of the day that maybe it wasn't your students that you were working with, but it was there were students at the school who you could use to fulfill that, and you could do it in maybe an after-school program or something like that? Are there regulations for that? Or
the way I would respond to that, and programs ask me these kinds of questions all the time, so I am prepared to answer your question. We want candidates to be having an authentic field experience, meaning they really do an assessment then on their practice with students they know deeply. So my question back to program always is, does the candidate have enough time and support to know those students, to understand their assets and learning needs in such a way that they can develop a lesson, teach in video, record, annotate, and reflect on it? So it's not prohibited. You do need to work with a class of students is what we say for cycle 1. And I get a lot of questions about, well, what does a class mean and how many? And we try to be as broad and supportive as possible, because sometimes a class is 6 students if you're in a rural setting sometimes, right? I mean, there's just every, as you know, different school placement you can imagine in our great state of California. So it really goes back to, does the candidate know the students well enough and have had enough time with them to appropriately understand their assets and needs and prepare that lesson and teach those students and reflect on the outcome? So possibly, yes.
I was going to say, I'll take that as a yes. Potentially, we could be creative.
Uh-huh.
Director Sandy?
It seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that if a consensus of this group is that option 2 seems like the right place to land, then I'm not sure we need to come back with recommendations, because I think it is what we simply need to clarify for the field what our assessment design standards say and how we expect that to unfold according to option 2. Option 2 is no change, just clarify that that's your intent. I'm seeing nods, so if that's where you're landing, then that's what would happen next. If you'd like further discussion, well, Terry Clark may have to disagree with me there. Yeah, I was not. I should have been. I should have been making eye contact. Our mind meld has failed, Terry. So please complicate this a little bit for me.
I'm going to blame this that the chart is not as clear as it should be, because option 2 answers the question about working with an English learner. Option 2 does not address the question of the multiple subject teacher working in literacy. Now, the assessment design standards do require all candidates, multiple and single, to work and show that they effectively teach English learners. That doesn't have to be in a literacy lesson necessarily. So the other question we're asking you in those 2 big questions, for the literacy part of the TPA, is it acceptable for a multiple subject candidate to do that in their language of instruction, whether it be English or a different language? So that's why option 2 doesn't give us everything we need. And remember, if the candidate is not assessed on the TPA, they still will be assessed by their programs on these contents. It's not that they're not going to be assessed. It's just they would not be assessed on the TPA. And then I have one final little thing, that multiple and single subject candidates actually are not authorized to provide ELD, English language development, in a departmentalized or separate setting. They're only being prepared and authorized to provide English language development in the area of their credentials. So a math teacher is authorized to provide English language development in their math class. And the TPA design standards actually don't require the TPA to assess ELD at all. They just require it to assess that they're effectively teaching English learners. Sorry to have to.
I thought we were done.
Right.
Let me see if I can pick the threads of this thought back up. She's so right most of the time. Okay, but in this case, so the second question here regarding literacy, so if you say option 2 is the one we think we need, because we need all teachers to demonstrate on a TPA that they're working with ELs effectively. For every multiple subject candidate who chooses the literacy task on the Cal TPA to do their work with ELs, they're doing it in English, so you don't need to specify whether it's English or not. But if you think, regardless across the board, we should clarify that they can be working on developing literacy in the language of instruction, then you should say that out loud, and we can provide that clarification also to the field. And I don't think any redesign or amendment to our standards is necessary. It's just the question of, is literacy, does that mean in English? And that's separate from the question of, must they demonstrate they're working effectively with ELs?
Commissioner Grenoshire?
I'm sorry, but I'm looking at the 2 questions to guide implementation, and I'm not sure we have agreement or consensus on responses to those questions. So I'm wondering if we can focus on that and then go to the boxes and see where we land. Okay.
So since this is an information action item, what we can do is start with the motion, and so I'll repeat right. This is an information action item, and there are two key questions with respect to concurrent bilingual candidates and how they might respond to the TPA in light of ADS requirements. The staff would like direction on these questions. So what do we think about these two questions? And we'll accept a motion.
And if it helps, I think for question 1, you've said bilingual candidates must work with an English learner in English for that part. Now, again, they could do this in a math lesson because they could be developing the English learner's language during a math lesson. So I think for question 1, we understand what you kind of have said, but what we don't understand is, what are you thinking about question 2?
Commissioners, do I hear motion or direction for?
Do you need a motion or
two?
do you just need direction? Is fine.
Yeah.
A demotion, that's like direction plus motion. Marquita or Commissioner Granosha?
So I'm reflecting what I heard from some of our experts in the field, and so I think the research would suggest that it doesn't have to be completed in English. I think that's what our colleagues are telling us. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at our colleagues. Okay.
So if that's the consensus of the group, then we have sufficient direction to provide clarification to the field, and we don't think we need to make any amendments to the assessment design standards. Correct?
That was easy.
Oh.
Lunchtime is approaching. We get very efficient.
So if that's the direction that we're giving staff, do you feel that we've answered the questions, and do you have enough information to move forward? Okay. So we're going to make a little adjustment to our agenda. Oh, no? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rising and Ms. Gutierrez. And we're going to make a little adjustment to the agenda, and we're going to break for lunch. Then 4D will follow after lunch. 4E and F will be moved to Friday. Okay? So we are going to break for lunch and an hour, is that?
Yeah. I think so.
And we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
All right.
For returning from lunch, we do have a quorum, so we will. Yes, I do. Is there a gavel?
There is.
All right. Gavel, 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 gavel. Okay, so we are on item 4D, correct? Mm-hmm. Next item, 4D, is the proposed modification of the equivalency process for the Commission-approved subject matter preparation programs. This item is being presented by Terry Clark and Mike Taylor. This is an information action item. Ms. Clark, will you please begin?
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. So we began a conversation in September about how you would like candidates to demonstrate their subject matter knowledge in the future. In that item, it was shared that any major modifications to the process will need legislative action to update the process. And I wanted to remind you that based in current education code, subject matter is now assessed prior to student teaching, and that it is assessed independent of any pedagogy for that content area. And this is really different from most of all of the other states. At that point in September, staff explained the process to develop the subject matter requirements, and that the subject matter requirements, or SMRs, are what drive both the examination and the subject matter preparation programs. So Mike Taylor's joining me here at the table just in case you have any questions about the subject matter process, how they're developed, how they're distributed across the subtests for the Commission's examinations. Appendix A provides some of the key background from that September agenda item to have just at your fingertips in case you want to refer back to anything. We will be coming back to you at a future meeting on the topic of modifying how you assess content knowledge. But we were then asked, are there any short-term options? Is there anything we can do pretty quickly? Things that could be implemented without any legislative action. So we did some brainstorming. We really thought about it, and we think we've developed an option that would be implemented with regulatory action only that's within the current education code specifications. So in September, we explained that there are two routes to satisfying subject matter. You either pass a commission-adopted examination or you complete a commission-approved subject matter program. These are the only two things allowed by Ed Code. So when we were thinking, we had to fit, well, what fits in within an examination or what fits within a commission-approved subject matter program. And here's what we came up with. In the program route, there's already a regulation that defines an equivalency that commission-approved subject matter programs may grant. We gave you the actual regulatory language in Appendix B. A candidate provides a transcript to a commission-approved subject matter program, and that California-approved subject matter program may grant the equivalency if the candidate has taken the course, or any courses, at another regionally accredited college or university, 2 or 4 year, and the course addresses the same exact SMRs as the course that's being offered by the Commission-approved subject matter program. The subject matter program would grant an equivalency for that course or courses, thereby not requiring a candidate to take that course. The option we've come up with is somewhat of a mix and match option. This has not actually been allowed for subject matter programs in the past. This became an option for some of our other credentials based on some Ed Code language. For the bilingual credential now, a candidate can actually take some of it as an examination, and some of it by completing a commission-approved program. Also for the CTEL. So we do have some precedent for this in some other areas of educator preparation. Since the same SMRs define the subtests of the CSET examination and define the courses that the Commission-approved subject matter program offers, by adding some language to the regulatory process that says if a candidate has passed 1 or 2 CSET subtests, that the candidate should be granted an equivalency for the courses that address those same SMRs as for the subtest that they passed. This would allow a candidate who's been unable to pass a single or maybe 2 subtests the coursework route to satisfy the subject matter requirement. We have a couple examples of how this might be implemented. One likely way is for a multiple subject candidate. A lot of us have heard from candidates where an individual takes the CSET multiple subject. There are 3 subtests. Subtest 1 is for English language arts and history. Subtest 2 is math and science. And subtest 3 has human development, physical education, and the arts on it. For a lot of candidates, they pass subtest 1 and subtest 3. And they have some trouble with the CSET subtest 2, which is the math and science subtest. Often they go and study. They may take a study prep course. They retake the test. There are times that candidates still don't pass the test. If this course option were allowed, the candidate could go to a college, even a community college, and as long as the Commission-approved subject matter program reviews the course and affirms that the course the candidate completes addresses the SMRs that are in the math and science subtest, they could be granted an equivalency, and they could take only the math and science classes, and they would be exempted from the history, social studies, the English language arts, the human development, the physical education, and the arts classes. Another possible benefit to this option is, rather than a candidate who is somewhat weaker in the math and science area of just studying for a test and hoping to pass it on a one-day thing, they're actually taking a full course in the content area. They would therefore have stronger knowledge and skills now in the math and science fields. Another example we could give is that in the mathematics world, There are people who have a math or math-related degree, but they have trouble passing the harder of the math subtest, the one that includes the calculus topics. Well, if they pass the foundational math subtest and they have the courses that address the calculus topics and they've passed those courses, by putting the two together, the person would have demonstrated subject matter competence. As we thought about this option, I contacted the 3 higher education liaisons whose institutions offer teacher prep programs, Commissioners Sloan, Grinnell Shire, and Wall, to ask, well, do you think this could work for universities? They all said, well, yeah, this is a really interesting thing. We have to really think about it because it's going to have implications. It's going to have implications for commission-approved subject matter programs. It's going to have implications for examinations. But all of them said, it seemed like it would be a good thing to at least try out. So it's unclear what the impact would be of allowing this option. It's possible, really, that more programs would want to offer a subject matter preparation program because they'll have candidates who want to come in and take 1 class, 2 classes, because they haven't been able to pass those subtests. This could mean a decrease in candidates who take and retake subtests, which would actually be a benefit to the candidate. There is a possible impact on the commission's fiscal situation because there is administration fees that do come to the commission, but that is not something that should really hold you back from taking this action if it's beneficial to candidates. We're proposing this as an option we could implement in a fairly short term. We could begin the regulatory process, we could advise the programs, we could advise candidates. If you as a body are supportive of this idea of allowing a prospective teacher to mix and match the subtests of the CSET examinations with college coursework, we would work with our higher education liaisons, we'd work with the commission-approved subject matter preparation programs, and we would start to begin the regulatory process. We're here to answer questions if you have them.
Okay, we will now open up for public comment. Our first public comment, actually our only public comment right now, is Rigel Massaro. If you could please come up and state your name and affiliation.
Good afternoon, Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates. We just really wanted to commend the extremely quick turnaround. This was just, I was like, that was September, wow. So, and the creativity and flexibility to address this, this barrier for some teacher candidates in a way that does not lower our standards and our commitment to subject matter competence. The CSET can present a barrier that disproportionately affects candidates of color. So in terms of our commitment to teacher diversity and a robust pipeline, this is, we're really pleased to see this quick and seems like good solution. So again, we're also really heartened, kind of on a related note, to see the literacy assessment on the CTC's priorities for 2019, and we support the similar kind of creativity and sense of urgency on that test, which can propose, which presents a similar barrier. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment for this item is now closed. Let's see, Commissioner Hind, then Klatt, then Levy.
I first have a question and then a comment. My question is the coursework that can be combined, whether it was already taken in the past or it will be taken in the future, is there the same limit, the 7-year limit? Does that apply to the coursework as it does with other credits?
The Commission has no time limit on how long coursework is effective. There is a 10-year limit for examinations. Now, some institutions have a limit on their catalog rights and how long back they'll let a candidate go, but that is up to the individual institution. Our guidance would be that coursework, they could already have taken it and they are reviewing the coursework, and if the transcript shows that similar SMRs are taken, it may very well require a syllabus being provided to the Commission-approved subject matter program. The coursework could have been already taken, yes.
So I would only suggest that we might think, I really love this option. Let me start there, because I don't think that a test is right for everybody. I think that a combination is a great solution where taking a whole program is not an option. I do think we should think about how long we want to allow coursework to be accepted, though, because if you took courses, say, 20 years ago, things have changed. So we wouldn't want somebody who maybe isn't up to speed with what's really happening in that, whatever that subject area is. I don't know what that kind of limit would look like, but I do support the overall item. I did want to also highlight where you talked about right before staff recommendations, there's a part about the possibility of broadening it to community college, which I also would support if we were to talk about that for those candidates who cannot afford to go to a state school or a four-year other sort of institute, to be able to take some of those courses at community college and then go on to take the test to also become a teacher that way. I think that's great.
Commissioner Clapp, and then Olivey.
I have a question, and I don't want to get us off track, so if it's off track and I need to save it for another time, you can let me know that. But as I was looking at the chart and noticing that there, or reminded, I guess, that there aren't commission-approved subject matter programs in business, home economics, or ITE. So that's just CSET and then a pedagogy class, right? Is that how someone would do that path?
They would have to do CSET if someone wants to become a teacher for business, home economics, or ITE, and do a full teacher preparation program. Remember, these are the undergraduate collection of courses that would verify you have the subject matter knowledge. So you can still earn an initial credential in those by passing the CSET. You can also add those as an additional content area that you're going to teach by passing the CSET and doing a pedagogy course that's at least 3 semester units.
Okay, so, and that, thank you for, I was in my head thinking of getting a second credential, but I think my question will still be the same with both of those. How would this decision impact that? Would there be an option for someone to, let's say, like ITE is so broad, take some coursework and some parts of that CSET?
There would need to be commission-approved programs in ITE. What this option, because we don't have the time and the ability right now for legislative change, we would need to have a commission-approved program in that content area, and then the commission-approved program could grant the equivalency. So we would need some institutions to step up and submit a commission-approved subject matter program in that content area for the mix and match to be able to take place.
To wrap my head around this. So currently, if someone was going to, so anybody right now who wanted, let's say, a business credential would go through a teacher preparation program but would still have to satisfy the subject area with the business CSETs, correct? I'm trying to think of a way, especially when we're talking about CTE, of how this could also be leveraged for those candidates, since we have such a shortage, I think, right now. But it sounds like that's a bigger issue, maybe.
I think it is bigger, but luckily we do have a CTE work group working right now, and you can help bring that topic to them.
Commissioner Olivey, and then Commissioner Darlene Hammond.
So I'm assuming that passing is a C or better, and if so, who determines who is this the responsibility of the teaching, the preparation programs to authorize that, or is it ours?
The commission would do regulations for this, and you would be able to specify in those regulations. Officially, a D or better is passing a class, but you have other places in your regulations where it is specified that the person must get a C or better. And if that's what you wanted to put into the regulations for this, it would be that the person would have to get a C or better in the class that addresses the SMRs for the sub.
I would very much like to see a C or better, but I will leave it to everybody to decide
that. So this is a first step, which is, I think we're hearing a lot of nodding and approval and excitement about this. And also some ideas, which I think, as you and I have talked, and we've kind of been trying to figure out what the frameworks are, might require ed code change. I think you were just noting that if we were to also get to a place where we could say, here are the subject matter requirements, which I know are right there already spelled out. Universities may create courses to meet the requirements of the CSET or a part of the CSET that any university could offer as long as they meet the subject matter requirements. That would even make a broader array of options available for people, and that would require an ed code amendment. So I just want to suggest that I think the enthusiasm we're hearing, and I'm seeing nodding as I even say this, we ought to try to get that amendment so that we can encourage a broad array of universities, community colleges, universities to offer, the chunk of coursework that would match to each, component of the CSET. And I think that, Bonnie, might even extend to the ITE question that you were asking, but it certainly would extend to, part 3 of the math CSET or part 2 or whatever. You should imagine that would be readily available so people could, take the exam and have that option. Or start taking courses and then decide if they want to finish up with the exam,
Commissioner Marks?
I just had a question. Did you get any feedback when you talked with the universities about how soon they could get these programs up and these courses up and running? Because it seems like a wonderful option.
When you look at Appendix C, all of those X's are courses that are already up and running.
Right.
Those are programs that are already operating.
Limited availability.
So they're not everywhere.
Right.
There are some subject areas where there's only a few of the commission approved programs. We always have commission approved programs in our review process. For example, during your consent time today, you approved CSU Northridge for an elementary subject matter program. So now we're up to 17 of those. So that can happen all the time as whenever they submit them to us. At this point, under this proposal for no ed code change needed, it's only one of these commission approved programs that can offer this equivalency process. Although their partner, the example I gave would be of a local community college offering a course, and the CSU that's adjacent to that community college that has a commission approved subject matter program could say, yes, that course from the community college does meet that requirement, so you don't need to take it at our institution necessarily.
So there's greater availability.
There could be greater availability than what's on here right now.
Right.
But right now it would have to be an approved program.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioners, student liaison, any other comment? Yes, please.
I think that this is such a good idea. I can count like 5 people I know that have not been able to pass one of the subtests. So they haven't been able to join. This is just for UCR, but they haven't been able to join. So I think that if they had the option to take a class, and it is that math and science CSET that they're struggling to pass, I think that it would be very beneficial, especially if they didn't get a bachelor's degree in a science topic. They didn't take any science courses during their undergrad. So they're finding it really hard to recall material from high school. So yeah, I think that it would be very beneficial to a lot of students trying to join a program.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wall and then Commissioner Brown.
I agree with the benefit to students. I want to comment as someone working to try to get my colleagues in a different school or college to get subject matter approved programs, that the possibility of this excites them a great deal, much more than, because it means that students who aren't majors could still take their courses, which pushes them, by the way, to the larger proposal. So when we're working outside of a school of education and you're now having to partner with content areas, the politics are very different on a college campus. This, I think, gives us great inroads to try to expand the number of both approved programs, and ultimately, I think if we could change the ed code, I'll create greater paths.
Commissioner Brown?
Speaking from the community colleges who have, for instance, an associate degree for transfer in elementary ed, there are a number of courses, math, science in particular, that I can think of right now, Chem Phys, math for elementary teachers, that could be considered very appropriate. So I think there's also some things in place that could help. In addition, I think this idea of people who are non-majors thinking about then going into teaching, this could really open some doors that I think would be really helpful for our teacher shortage.
Yay.
So this is an information action item. Let's take action. Do I have a motion that the commission approve the notification, the proposed notification of equivalency process for the SMPPs? Okay. Moved by Commissioner Hind, seconded by Commissioner Marks. Do we have any comments, discussion? All right. Well, let's call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Motion passes.
Yes. It's probably the most enthusiastic vote we've taken.
We will now adjourn the Educator Preparation Committee, and I'll turn it over to closed session.
I will now recess the general session, and members of the commission will go into closed session. The general session will reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning. All right.
So I actually recessed, right, because we will continue tomorrow.
Right, but I have to yes, yeah.